Hey everyone, Dave here. It's time to build a new workstation in my lab. This will replace my current Debian Linux SID system that is 10 years old. Warning, this is an in-depth deep dive video. You may want to grab your favorite beverage and settle in, and perhaps increase the playback speed to 1.5x. Right. So in a nutshell, this is an Intel-based system, NVIDIA video card, a full ATX form factor. Aside from being my main workstation, its purposes will be to record in OBS, edit in Kdenlive, work in KVM-based virtual machines, and code in my IDE. I'll be using two HDMI capture cards from Blackmagic. Those are for recording video directly from my cameras, instead of using cheapy HDMI to USB converters, which I've been doing for years. I'm hoping the discrete HDMI capture cards will help with video encoding in OBS. You may find that there's a little bit of stutter going on in this video through the video feed, and that's due to the fact that my system just really can't handle OBS anymore. More on that later. Now you'll notice a lot of MSI parts in the image here, the case, motherboard, video card. Keep in mind, I am not sponsored by any of these companies, never have been, so you will get a fair evaluation of the gear. While I was at it, I figured I would upgrade some of my lab network to 2.5 gigabits per second. It sounded like the right thing to do. Now you might ask, why not AMD, Dave? I build those systems too. And in my opinion, at the level where I'm building, they're so close as far as productivity goes that it really doesn't matter too much to me. What I'm looking for mostly is compatibility, reliability, longevity, and especially price. That's the big factor here. And so I had a certain budget, and for this particular build, it seemed that Intel and NVIDIA seemed to be the way to go. But AMD is great also, and you could build an awesome system that could most likely do all the things I want to do just about as well, if not the same or better. You never know. It depends on the system you build. Okay, so I chose Intel NVIDIA for this, and I built a very similar system for home use about 6 months ago. The MSI components mesh really well together, and you can find an in-depth article about that build at my website in the description for this video. All right, let's go through the to-do list. It's a rather long list, and it's going to be a long video. So we're going to start with why a new computer. I always want to know what the purpose is of the computer, or the purposes, and what the goals are. And so I've laid those out, and we'll talk about that a little bit in that first section. Then we'll talk about the specifications for the system, all the parts I'm using, the prices that I paid. I'll show you the PC parts picker page, and you could possibly build your own system off of that if you wish to. So I'm going to try to be as transparent as possible with the specs on this system. Then we'll move into the build itself. So this will be a long portion of the video. And we'll start with the case, we'll move into the motherboard and all the components and build that computer step by step. We'll have different subcategories for each component within the build section. Then once the system's completely built and all set up, we'll try to boot it. Hopefully it'll boot up, and we'll go into the BIOS. And once in the BIOS, I might make a couple changes, and also we'll upgrade the BIOS and flash that BIOS, make sure we're using the latest proper version for the motherboard. After that's done, we'll install the operating system. I'm going to be installing Linux, go figure. And for this particular build, I'm actually going to be using Ubuntu. More on that later, but in a nutshell, I feel that Ubuntu Linux will give me the best shot at the most compatibility for the hardware I'm going to be using and the software. Now, don't get me wrong, you could do all of the stuff that I want to do on just about any Linux. You could use Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch, and so on and so on. But I'm going with Ubuntu, and we'll see how it works out. Once the operating system is built, we'll move into the networking. There's a wired and a wireless card on the system, and we'll show all the networking in the system itself. Then we'll show the video. Now, for this system, again, I'm using an NVIDIA video card. And Linux has a great driver. They have the Nouveau driver, which has been getting better and better over time. But I'm fairly sure that I'm going to need to use the non-free NVIDIA driver. And so we'll install that, and that hopefully will make everything work properly with OBS. And then we'll install OBS and make sure that that is actually working correctly and test it with video. Once that's installed, I can then do the replacement. So my main system that I'm recording at right now is that Debian system that I was talking about. I have 4 monitors. I'm going to replace the system and kind of readjust the monitors and my cameras and lighting and stuff. So we'll have kind of a new setup for the main workstation. And once that's done, we'll see if we can start recording in OBS on the new system and complete this video with that new system. And once we get in there, I'll show the audio. Can't really show the audio till I hook it up to the new system. So we'll show all my audio settings, and then also how to tweak the system to make it a bit more productive, use resources better, and then other apps that I use. So 10 items here. It's a pretty huge to-do list. It's going to be a long video. So if you don't like my talking, just turn the video off. Okay, so why a new computer? So the main purpose for the system will be to record in OBS and record all of my videos in there and have a lot of power so I can do all the encoding I need to and not have any slowdowns and blips that you'll probably see in the video feeds here. So that's the primary reason. Now, the system I'm using right now is Debian Linux, and it's 10 years old. So fairly old computer. If you can get 10 years out of a workstation, that's pretty good. And I could use it longer, and it does very well with most things, but it's showing its signs of age. It's showing the wear. I could possibly upgrade it, but I've decided to go with a new system. Now, quick background. 10 years ago, I was using a different operating system and decided to start running Linux exclusively in the office on my main workstation. Now, I've been running Linux in all kinds of different fashions since the year 2001, for work, for servers, especially on laptops and at home. But it wasn't until about 2015, 10 years ago from this video, when I decided to run it exclusively in the office. And so there was an audio issue that was caused by the other operating system, and it was really the final straw. It was the last nail in the coffin, and the light dawned on me, and I said, it's time to switch over to Linux on my main system. Now, this was a big undertaking because all my software ran on the other operating system, so this was going to be a big changeover. But at the time, I was listening to A New World Symphony by Dvorak, and I apologize for the terrible pronunciation of that, but A New World Symphony, and it just kind of all dawned on me. It was time to do it. So I did it, and I called the computer NW1 for New World 1. And I never looked back, and been using Linux exclusively on my main system ever since for everything work-related. No joke. So a lot of people do this, and it's a real thing. And so this was 10 years ago. Now the system's older, time for a new system. And we're going to call this one NW2. So New World 2. Now, I mentioned before, you want to know what the purpose is. What's the purpose of the computer? Primarily, it's to record in OBS and getting really good, high resolution, high frame rate, really good recordings within OBS, or as good as I can make them with the cameras that I have. Also, editing in Kden Live, which is my video editing tool of choice on Linux. In addition, I want to run super powerful KVM virtual machines. Now, if you don't know about KVM, that is a virtualization platform that you can use in Linux and some other operating systems that allow you to run virtual machines. And it's very, very good on resources. It's extremely powerful and it works really well. And I run it now and I rely on it heavily for training and for webinars and for testing. But I want to have even more powerful virtual machines. So the new computer will hopefully allow for this. In addition, just more power in general, more powerful CPU, double the RAM. Sometimes I find I'm running out of RAM if I'm doing these really big projects or if I'm doing a webinar and I'm running lots of virtual machines. I have 32 gig on this system, so we'll do 64 gig on the new system. Also, much more powerful video to allow for OBS to work the way I want, and more powerful networking, 2.5 times faster, hopefully, if it works out properly. In addition, another purpose is formidable IDE work. So when I work in my IDE for coding, I want to be able to work with powerful plugins, powerful languages, AI tools, and so on and so on. So formidable IDE work. Those are the purposes. That's why we're going to build this new computer. All right, let's talk about the specs for this system. And generally, when I'm building a system, I'll start a spreadsheet. And so if you look here, this is the spreadsheet, and basically I'll just list the components and whether I've ordered them and whether I've received them, just have checkboxes for both those columns, the model number, so the exact part for those, the price that I paid, and the price that I want to beat. So I'll set a budget for it for the entire total and then try to beat a specific price. I was successful on some and unsuccessful on others. And then I'll have some details and links and whatever other information I need to add in there. But the main thing is that I'm trying to stay within budget and getting all parts that will be compatible with each other. So if we look down this line here, if we add all this together, you'll see it comes to $2,107 worth of parts all together. But a lot of these parts aren't necessary for the build itself. So for example, I've got a switch here, I've got an additional monitor so I can have a 5th monitor, which I'm hoping for, another mouse. I like the Razer stuff. That's just fun stuff, but all that's kind of extra. So if we were to highlight all this and then remove those ones that are in purple here, we'll see that my total price for this build, $1,349. Now, my budget was $1,300 to $1,400. That was the budget for the computer itself. And then we had an additional amount for video components and networking. So I was able to stay in that number. A couple things with this. This particular device I'm not working with. We'll talk more about that later. And this particular card, this networking card, I won't be using because there won't be any slots available for it because I'm using 2 video capture cards. But like I say, this other stuff isn't really necessary for the build. So the build itself came to about $1,350. This is generally how I'll do it though. I'll start with a spreadsheet of everything that I want. I'll start looking at compatibility. I'll start looking at the documentation pages and the specs at the manufacturers for the motherboard, for the CPU, for the RAM, and make sure it's all compatible and make sure we have enough power and so on and so on. So this is all part of the planning stage, and for me, it's all about planning. If the planning goes well, then the build should go well, and then it should work properly. Now, I also use PC Part Picker, and we'll jump over to that page, and I'll paste the link into the description for this video for this particular PC Parts Picker. And you can see that some of these prices are definitely higher than what I purchased. So this Core i7-13700K processor, right now, cheapest price at PC Parts Picker is $313.95 at Amazon. I was actually able to get that for $311. Okay, so not that much different. If we look at the motherboard, it's at $207.62, also at Amazon. but I was able to get that for $165 a couple weeks ago. So there's a lot of volatility you'll find when it comes to pricing, especially RAM, really all the devices. So I'll always use this beat this price column so that I can watch the prices and watch them go up or go down. If they do go down, then that's the time to buy. It's kind of like the stock market almost, but we're not doing anything with the stock market here. But really just tracking the prices, that's it, and trying to get the best price you possibly can. So by having these two columns, it kind of helps out, and using PC Parts Picker or other websites like it can also aid in you finding cheaper parts. Just be careful where you buy, make sure it's a reputable location. So this actually worked out pretty well. We were able to beat the prices on a bunch of these, save some money on the motherboard, save some money on the hard drive, $30 or so, $35 on the video card, and so on and so on. So that's always what I'm going to do. I'm always going to go and build that spreadsheet, and then also work off of PC Part Picker and do a lot of research and make sure that everything will be compatible. Okay, enough yapping. I'm excited about this new system, so let's build this thing already. We'll start with the case. This is an MSI with LED color. I used this same case for my recent home build, and I like it a lot. Let's get it ready. All right, so here's our case, and we're looking at the back here. We need to get the sidewalls off so that we can install all of our components. And to do that, on this particular case, we have thumb screws, and we can unscrew these with a Phillips head or just unscrew them by hand. So to get this wall off, we'll remove this first one here, unscrew that, and then there's a little spot here where you can put in your thumb or your fingers to kind of force the wall out there. Okay, and do that carefully, and then we can kind of pull this entire guy out. And there we go. And now we can see the inside of our case, and we're going to install everything in there. However, to get a bunch of the cables in and a bunch of the case connectors, we'll have to take the back wall off. And so got to get rid of that screw as well. And we'll pull off that wall also, pry that out there. There we go. And now we have access to everything on the back here. And we'll be doing more with that in a little bit. Okay, so we've placed the case on its side here, and on the back of the case we see we have a fan for exhausting air. We've got our slot covers, and those will be for the cards that we install. We have a lot of connectors here, case connectors for audio and USB and so on, and there's more of those. If we look over here in the front of the case, we see 3 fans, and so the 3 fans will intake air. They'll bring air in, it'll flow through across the processor and RAM, and then out and exhausted from the back. On the bottom of the case, we also have a filter, and so we can remove this and vacuum it out if we need to. So it's good to have a filter. And the entire top of the case is actually a filter, and this can be taken off. This is just magnetized on there. So a nice little feature. And of course we have our power buttons and USB ports on the front of this. So a couple things that I'll do here before I begin. Usually I'll blow out the case with some type of compressed air. Here we have an X-Power compressed air that plugs in. So we'll blow that out now. And that just gets any extra dust out of the case before we begin. And another thing is we're going to have to mount this motherboard in the case. Now to do so, normally you'll need standoffs for the screws that go into the motherboard. This case actually has standoffs, and they're pre-mounted in there. So we don't have to do that. We can just screw the motherboard right into this particular case. But if you find that you need to put standoffs in, or if you need any other types of screws, your case will usually come with a whole box of good stuff here. And here we have screws, we've got additional panels, and we can change out the panel on the back. We've got a whole ton of screws in here, and tie wraps, and tools as well to use. So this case comes with all that stuff. We'll be using some as we go on, especially screws to screw in the motherboard into those standoffs. Now, another thing that's really important, before we install the motherboard, and this is the board right here, you want to make sure that you have anti-static protection going, so ESD prevention. And so if you look over here, you can kind of see that the entire case is sitting on an anti-static mat. This is connecting to a grounded plug. And normally what I'll do with that is I'll connect that to an anti-static strap, clip that on, and then also I'll connect the case to that. Now it's already sitting on the anti-static mat, but we'll use this to plug in here and use the alligator clip to connect. And I'll also stand on an anti-static mat, and all of it is connected out to ground. And so this is a good way to do it, to try to equalize the potentials of any electricity, any voltage. So we don't want to damage any of our components, so I try to do ESD prevention as much as possible. That's electrostatic discharge prevention. Now I'll keep the board in the anti-static bag until I'm ready for it, but before I start the install, I'll make sure I am connected, make sure the case is connected and on an anti-static mat, and also touch the case and try to be as grounded as possible. Here's the motherboard I'll be using. It's an MSI Mag B760 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. It's the same board that I used in the home build that I referenced earlier, and for the price, I'm quite satisfied with it. Now, you have to remember, everything connects to the motherboard. Everything. So this board will accept the Core i7-13700K CPU and the Kingston DDR5 5600 MTS RAM. And also it has 3 M.2 slots, and so those are for NVMe drives. I'll only be using one of those for now, but it's nice to have the additional spaces. So let's install it. All right, so we're going to take the motherboard out of its anti-static bag, and this is sealed here slightly. And we have our electrostatic discharge protection going. So here's the board. This is going to go in this direction, and we're just going to place it in here, and we'll line it up and make sure that there's no cables in the way. There is a fan cable that's right down here. It's right about here, and I just want to make sure that's out of the way of the motherboard so we don't cut into it or damage it. And now we can screw everything in. Now, before we showed the standoffs in the case, and they line up with the holes on the motherboard, standard ATX style. So we're going to screw that in now. And now we can start putting the screws in, and you want to make sure that you use the right screw. Needs to have the right thread, so you need to search through your case screws and get the correct one that'll match with the standoffs in your motherboard. And quite often I'll use a #1 screwdriver, and that'll fit right in there, and I can place it right in the hole and screw it in. So we do that for each of these. And then we can do that with all the rest of the screws that we have to put in. There's 9 for this ATX motherboard, and there's basically 3 rows here, here, and here. So we'll put in all those 9 screws now. One thing to make sure is that the back panel is nice and flush with the case, and so that there's no openings. Try to keep it as sealed as possible in there. And make sure that nothing's getting caught. Like I said, no cables or anything like that, like the fan cable, which is behind there. And now it definitely looks good. Want to make sure they're all tightened, all 9 of them. And also, I didn't mention, whatever screwdriver you use, go with non-magnetic. And I try to avoid power tools as well, anything heavy or anything that uses a battery or anything electrical. So there you go. We've got the motherboard installed. And so in this motherboard, we're going to connect everything. The CPU is going to go here underneath this plastic cover, and the heatsink will go on top of that. The RAM sticks will go here. The NVMe storage drive will go underneath this heatsink. The GPU, our video card, will go here. And our two discrete video capture cards will go here and here. And then we have lots of connections. We've got our main power, we've got USB, we've got RGB, audio, CPU power over here. And so lots of different stuff that we'll have to connect at the end. But that's essentially what we're going to be doing. Time for the random access memory, or RAM. For this build, I'm installing a 64 gigabyte kit of Kingston Fury Beast. It's rated at 5600 megatransfers per second. It's DDR5 CL40. Now, sometimes I'll install the RAM after the CPU so as not to potentially damage the RAM during the heatsink installation, but here we'll install it now before the CPU so that you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so we're going to be installing to our RAM slots, and we have 4 here on this board. We're only installing 2 sticks of RAM, but you need to know which of these slots you want to be installing to. And so if you were installing 1 stick of RAM to this board, it would go to the second slot away from the CPU. So I always count away from the CPU, 1, 2. That's if we had 1 stick of RAM, but we have a bank of 2, a group of 2 that we're going to be installing. It's a kit, and that's going to go in the second and the fourth slots away from the CPU. And they are known as DIMM A2 and DIMM B2 respectively. So we're going to install to those. Now, before we can install, we need to open up the locking mechanism for each of those. We do that just by pressing the plastic locks aside. And always remember to make sure you're preventing ESD. And we have anti-static methods set up like we showed before. And then we can grab our first RAM stick. Okay. And the way we're going to install this is straight down. And I'll be pressing with my thumbs on each end here, applying even pressure. Now, whenever you carry these RAM sticks, you want to make sure you do it from the edges. Don't touch the connectors on the inside edge here, which will be going down into the motherboard. You could do some damage. You don't want to get it dirty, and so make sure you just keep on the edges here. Now, also, you want to line it up and see if it will install properly. Now, when we line it up like this, if we zoom in there a little bit, we'll see that the notch on the RAM is not actually lined up with the notch in the RAM slot. So I need to turn it over. And then we can check it and say, oh yes, now it's lined up. And that's generally going to be the case. The logo, or the front of the RAM, will go away from the CPU. So I'll start installing with the one farthest away. We'll go down into the slot. It fits in there. Check that it's lined up properly. And then we'll press down with even pressure until it snaps into place. And you probably could hear that. Both locking ears snapped into the notches on the side of the RAM. And then we can just repeat the process with the second one. Turn it over and install to that other slot. Place it in gently and then press straight down. See if I can show those locking ears snapping this time. Even pressure with the thumbs. Straight down, and you can see this one snapped and this one snapped into place, and we are done. It is now installed. That's it. So installing RAM, not very difficult. You just want to make sure you don't bend the RAM or break it or have any issues with the RAM connectors or the slots. And normally I'll close up all the ears when I'm done. For this build, I'm using a single storage drive for now, the Samsung 990 Pro 2TB NVMe drive. On my current, or my old system that I'm replacing, I store video data on an NVMe drive, but the OS boots from an SATA-based SSD. So compared to the older computer, we should see an increase in speed while booting and while using the operating system and applications. Let's install this bad boy. So we'll be installing the drive underneath this heatsink right here. This motherboard supports 3 NVMe drives, the first one going here and the second and third here and here. However, only the first one works directly off the CPU. The other 2 work off of the chipset, so they won't be as efficient. I'm only installing one for now, so we'll install it to here. And when we do so, we just need to make sure that we have the right type of drive. So if we take a look at our drive, this is an NVMe drive. And you'll note that it just has chips and it has a sticker on top. Some drives come with a heatsink. Now, we don't want that in this case. We just want a regular drive without a heatsink because the motherboard has heatsinks built in. As long as you have a heatsink on your NVMe drive, it's a good idea to have one, but it doesn't really matter which way you go, if you have it built in or if you have the heatsink on the motherboard, because NVMe drives can get hot, so you want to make sure that you are cooling them. So we're going to use the heatsink that's here. We need to remove that first, though, before we can install the drive. So this has 2 screws, and for this I'll go with a different screwdriver, slightly smaller size, Phillips head, and we'll remove those 2 screws now. And once you unscrew the second one, you might have to pull the whole piece out. And sometimes the standoff, the connector actually comes off with it. So we'll have to screw that in properly when we're done. But that's actually okay. That's going to be common how that comes out. And we'll put that to the side, that heatsink. Okay, and if we zoom in here a little bit, you can see we have the slot connector for the drive, and then we have a screw to screw that drive in, and that's going to hold it down. Basically, we're going to install the drive at a 45-degree angle and then screw it down here. Now, this screw connector, quite often your motherboard will come with an extra one just in case you lose it or if it breaks, and so keep that in mind. Quite often you'll have extra screws, and so we're going to unscrew that now. And there's the little screw with the holder. And we'll put that back in once we get the drive in. Place that safely aside. And now we'll put the drive in. And that's going to go into the slot here. Need to make sure that the notch is lined up with the notch on the slot. So we'll do that, and we'll go in at about a 45-degree angle and just kind of place it in there. And there's a little side view of that. And then we can make sure it's all the way in the slot. And then we can press it down, and we can put that screw back in. This is a little bit of fine work, so we have to be careful here. If you want to use a pair of grabbers or a other tool to help you get the screw in there, feel free. Okay, and all the while being careful not to touch the motherboard if at all possible, and trying hard not to drop any screws. Also, the edge of the drive, you'll note that I was staying away from any copper edges. And then we have this little tab here that could be placed like so, this black tab, so that it kind of holds the drive down. but we don't want to go too far in with it so it doesn't damage any of the chips there. Okay, so that is now installed, and now we can replace the heatsink. Now, these heat sinks will normally come with a thermal pad. The thermal pad has to go right against the drive. Now, what they'll do when you first get the board is they'll cover the thermal pad with plastic. So we want to remove that plastic because otherwise you're not going to get proper heat transfer. That's just there to protect the pad until we use it. And we'll place this back in. Again, being careful here not to damage anything and just going gentle. If something doesn't appear to fit properly, we can always remove it and start over. But that first screw looks like it went in correctly, and we'll put in the second screw. And making sure we go straight in so that we do not mess up any of the threads. We don't want to go too tight on this. Don't want to use too much torque. And I'll look at that from the side as well and make sure that it is as tight to the bottom and to the drive as possible. And you can see from that side image that it looks pretty good, and we should be in good shape. And there you have it. And you would follow the same process if you wanted to install a second or a third drive. It's one big heat sink for both of those drives. But again, keep in mind that they work off of the chipset. This one, the primary, works off of the CPU. So it's going to be more resourceful, it's going to be more powerful, more efficient, basically. But there you go. There's our drive. So that is a 2 terabyte 990 Pro NVMe drive. That's going to be my primary drive here that I'm going to use, the operating system. All the data is going to go on here. And you never know, maybe in the future I might offload to a second NVMe drive, like maybe projects that I'm working on, but not currently, but I may be working them in the near future. Might put a drive in for that. In the past, I would store data files here, music files, video files, audio files, etc. But I think I'm going to keep it all on the one drive. One other thing that I might do is clone this drive periodically, probably using CloneZilla to an SSD. Now, on the back of this case, we have lots of ports for SSD. We have lots of housings for SSD drives. We'll show that a little bit later. And perhaps what I'll do is get a 2 terabyte SSD and do an entire clone. So in case something happens to this drive, we'll have the clone right in the system. Whenever you do that, you want to make sure it's the same size as the drive that you're cloning. So there you go. That's about it. And we'll move on to the next step. Okay, time for the brains of this operation, because it sure ain't me. Here we have an Intel i7-13700K processor. The K means that the clock is unlocked, and we can increase the base multiplier as we wish. That's known as overclocking. I won't be overclocking to start, but who knows? Down the road, as my video recordings become more complex, it might be necessary. Speaking of video, this chip allows for onboard video as well. Not super powerful video, mind you. If you're wondering, the non-integrated graphics counterpart is the 13700KF. That F would mean no GPU and a discrete video card would be necessary. So let's install our CPU now. All right, so on to the CPU installation. Now, I wanted to show the unboxing, but the video failed halfway through, so I've already opened the box. But one thing I just want to mention is to make sure that it is sealed. Any of these boxes that you get for CPUs or drives or RAM, make sure it's sealed and hasn't been unsealed or cut before you open it. Now, if we look at this, we see it's an Intel Core i7-13700K. And it has to be installed into an LGA 1700 socket. And so we have to make sure that our motherboard is the correct socket. And it is indeed, if we look at our motherboard here, we'll see the socket here, and you can see it says LGA 1700 right here. So that's where we're going to be installing our CPU. And here is the CPU itself. And there you go. You should be able to see there, i7-13700K. And I'll leave that in there until I'm ready to install it. So a couple of things here. One, we want to make sure that we have our anti-static tools going and our ESD prevention. And two, we want to take a look at what we're going to do here. Now, to install the CPU, we have to unlock it. And we do that with this arm here and remove this cover. Install the CPU, then we'll lock it, get rid of this top plastic cover, and then we'll have to work with the heatsink because CPUs generate tons of heat. All right, so I'm going to start the process now. First, I want to unlock it. To do that with this arm, I'm going to press down and then away from the CPU, and that'll lift up, and then we can lift this right here. That's the cover, and it exposes the LGA 1700 socket. This is LGA, or land grid array, as opposed to PGA, or pin grid array. Most of Intel's CPUs are LGA. Now, if we close this again for a moment, you'll notice something. Over here, we have a little triangle in the plastic. That denotes pin 1 for our socket. And it's important because you want to orient your CPU correctly. So if we take a look at the CPU here, if you look really carefully, you'll see a little tiny arrow on the circuit board. And there's also an arrow that's kind of drawn onto the CPU top here. You can see a little triangle there. So those indicate pin 1. That's got to match up with pin 1 on the socket. And so let's go ahead and install that now. I'm going to take it out of the plastic container. Now with this, you want to make sure you don't touch the bottom of the CPU. I'm going to grab from the edges, and they give you a little space here to grab it. So I'm going to grab it now. And this is a zero insertion force installation, or ZIF. So we can just place it right into the socket. And if it doesn't go flush, we can kind of just move it around sideways a tiny bit. And you might have heard a little click there. It tapped into place. And now we can kind of move it back and forth, and we can kind of see that, yes, it is now flush with the socket. And again, we want to verify, okay, we have the CPU cap has the triangle here and a triangle here, and also the cover had that triangle, all indicating pin 1, the first pin, or in this case, the first land for the CPU. And that allows us to orient the CPU properly before we close it down. Okay, now we can remove the plastic cover. Pull that away. That is recyclable, but usually I'll hold on to these and keep them in the motherboard box. And they tell you not to remove that until after you install the CPU. And the reason is so that the socket is not exposed for any longer than it has to be. And I've been actually trying to speak kind of sideways away from the socket so I don't have any saliva coming out and spitting into the socket, right? So now we have that installed. It is flat, as you can see from the image. And we can go ahead and close the cover. And then we can lock it down. Now, if you want, you can always check one more time. Just make sure it's nice and flush in there so that we don't break anything. But we'll close that up. And then we'll move the arm to start locking it in place. Now, when I start to do that, you can see that the lever is going to cause this to go on top of this and hold that cover down. And once that's in place, we can press down on the arm and down and lock it in place. Okay, looks good. So now it's locked down, and the CPU is definitely not going anywhere. And at this point, we can start working with the heatsink. Okay, so I've shown how to lock this down, but we're actually going to remove this entire housing around the CPU. It all depends on what type of heatsink you install. Now, there's some heatsinks that you can install where you screw them in here. You'll put some stoppers on the back and some connectors, and then screw these in on these 4 holes here. Or you can remove the entire housing here, remove the 4 screws, and put in the heatsink housing in its place. And that's actually what we're going to do. Now, previously in the other build that I did and the article that I've been referring to, I used a heatsink where we actually used these holes here and we kept the entire housing on here. That was a Cooler Master Hyper 212. I don't know exactly how happy I am with that heatsink, and there's a couple things that go into that. But regardless, I decided to go with a different heatsink for this system. This is an Arctic Freezer 36. Now, whenever you get these products, make sure that you get the documentation. Go to the QR code and grab the documentation for this. Same goes obviously for the motherboard and everything else. Now, if we look at the bottom here, you'll see it says Rev 4, and that may be important for your documentation. So you want to know the exact product and the revision that you're working with. Now, this particular heatsink can work with AMD or with Intel, and they give you some connectors for both. I'm going to be using the Intel connector, or housing, if you will, and that's this. And you'll note that this has a triangle here denoting pin 1. So that's actually going to take the place of the housing for the CPU. Now, these types of heat sinks are usually transported in cardboard. The fan will be covered in cardboard. There'll be lots of cardboard dust. So I'll usually do a couple of things. I'll use an air compressor to blow off all the dust off of these types of components, and then I'll use some isopropyl alcohol, and you can see I've relabeled this, and actually clean them and use a lint-free cloth to clean them off and try to reduce that dust as much as possible. Now, of course, I'm going to use this somewhere else away from the computer, blow these out and clean them away from the system. And in fact, I normally cover the system when I'm not actually doing anything inside of it. So I'll take the glass wall and put it back on while I'm doing this work. Now, another thing that we need to do is tape up the back panel of the motherboard. And you want to use some type of painter's tape to do so. And you can see in the image that I've already done that. And you want to make sure it'll be secure because we're going to remove those screws here. And once we do, it'll be insecure because there's a panel on the back. And so the painter's tape will keep that in place while we put in the new housing. So I'm going to blow that off and clean it now and be back in a moment. All right, so I know I'm changing the game around here, but I did want to show how to lock this down properly in the case that you use a different type of heatsink, like in my other build. But we're going to go ahead and actually just unlock that now. Bring that back. Lift the cover. And we're going to remove all 4 screws. Now, if you don't have a star-like tool, a Torx tool, to get the screws out of the housing, a lot of these heatsinks will come with a tool, and this one actually has one. So we're going to unscrew these 4 screws now, and again, making sure that we do have painter's tape on the back, holding the back panel of the housing on there. And if you were really worried, of course, you could also remove the CPU in case you think maybe you'll get a screw touching it or a screwdriver or a tool. So I'm just loosening each one, and then we'll unscrew each one all the way. Once they're unscrewed enough, we should be able to just lift the housing with the screws out of there. Just doing this very carefully. And the arm with the other 2 screws. And I'll save those inside of a Ziploc bag and put them in my motherboard box. Okay, now that we've removed that housing, we can put in our nice blown out and cleaned new Arctic housing. And this comes with 4 screws to do so. You can see they're a little bit longer. They have the same thread, but they'll be able to reach down further to keep this housing in place. And so we'll place this on, and I'm just going to make sure that CPU is flush again before I put this on. Carefully put this on and around the CPU cap and make sure it lines up with the holes on the motherboard. And again, don't forget we have that pin 1, which is identifying where to install this. And so it's the same corner as the CPU and the motherboard. That triangle denotes pin 1. These particular screws work with a Phillips head screwdriver, so we can place those in. And I'll just place them in and do a couple turns in a star or X pattern before I tighten it all the way. And we're just trying to get them to grab onto the back plate behind the motherboard. We don't want to press down too hard because we only have the back plate held on with painter's tape. So we don't want to press down too hard at first. We want them all to grab before we start tightening them. So now that those are in there, kind of check and make sure that this is flush and that the CPU cap is flush with the bottom of that. And we can start tightening. Now we don't want it to be too tight, but I'll do one more turn and feel for the torque. Make sure it's the same torque on each screw, the same amount of resistance basically. And that should be good. At this point we can remove the painter's tape from the back, which I'll do, and then we can move on to the next step. Alright, so after inspecting this a little bit, I think I like this housing better than using the arms that connect to these 4 holes here. If you want to do it this way, you have to kind of have your hand on the back of the case holding the piece that's going to hold the screw in for each of these. It gets a little difficult and actually almost becomes like a 2-man job, a 2-person job. So I think I like this a little better. My only concern is how flat this housing is with the CPU. I took a couple pictures and it looks pretty good. I just want to make sure I get good heat transfer between the CPU cap and the heatsink. Speaking of which, here is the heatsink. And so this is going to go in this way, and the bottom has the plate where the heat transfer will be conducted. Now this is covered with plastic right now, and we'll take that off before we install it. But there's 2 screws, and they're going to connect to these 2 here. In addition, we have fans. And we have 2 fans. One will go on each side of the heatsink. And they have these screws that are stood off a little bit, and they actually snap into the heatsink. And so we can have a fan on each side. And the beauty of this design, and by the way, I've cleaned all these and blown them out and everything, trying to be gentle with the fans so as not to damage the ball bearings in them. But the beauty of these is that they're reversed. If you look at these, the logo's on the front here. We have the convex side here, and you'll notice that this one doesn't have screws, but this one does. And if we flip it over, you see the reverse. So you can reverse these when you connect them. You could go this way, or you could go the other way and just switch them. And this way it'll work regardless of whether you have airflow going from the front to the back or from the back to the front. For this case, it's going to be front to back. The intake is in the front and the exhaust is in the back. So we want to go in that same direction. Now, these fans have markings on them, And you can see them here if we focus in here. There we go. And so you can see the airflow is going to go in this direction. And also you can see that the fans turn this way, or counterclockwise for this particular fan. The other one is reversed in its orientation. So this, because it has the logo on the front, that's going to go in the front of the CPU, closer to the front of the case. And that's going to pull air in. The other one will be placed in reverse, like so. You won't see the logo, but normally you wouldn't be looking from the back of the case anyway. And that'll keep pulling air. And again, we have the convex side here, and that'll pull the air out and out the back of the case through the back case fan. So pretty ingenious design where we could have it go in both directions. Now you may decide that you want to do a little dry fit. If you do, I highly recommend you put something down over the CPU first, like a dry lint, a brand new clean lint-free cloth. But these should fit, and it should work out for us pretty well. But before I can actually install the heatsink, we need to put in thermal paste, otherwise known as thermal compound or thermal jelly. And that's going to be applied right to the CPU cap. Now, the heatsink that we're using came with some MX6, and that was included with it. But my personal preference is to use Arctic Silver. And I have that in a Ziploc bag. I'm going to reuse that. But before I even do that, I'm going to blow out the case a little bit, just around the CPU, just to get any dust off of there. And trying to have as clean an environment as possible before I attach that heatsink. Now, different strokes for different folks. Some people like to do an X pattern when they apply the thermal compound. I like to just do one line. That's what I've done for, I don't know, 25, 30 years. And just one line down the center and not going too close to the edge. And that's worked well for me. I've never had one of my CPUs overheat, although I don't do very much overclocking. And so we're going to use our Arctic Silver here. Trusted brand I've been using for a long time. And I'm just praying that my video doesn't cut out on me and stops recording in the middle of this, because I can't do it twice. All right, now what I like to do with this is I like to empty a little bit out onto like a paper towel or something, just to kind of get out any junk or inconsistent type stuff. And then we're going to place that in. And once we get this on there, we're going to get the heatsink on there very soon afterward and get it pressed down and make sure that it's nice and flush. And I'm going to keep that paper towel ready to kind of place underneath the thermal compound injector here, syringe if you will, just in case there's any excess. And I might actually place that right here. And let's go ahead and apply. I'm applying a pretty liberal amount here. But again, I don't want to go too close to the edge. And like I said, sometimes this will kind of make a little bit of a mess. Have that paper towel ready, place it on there, and get it out. And cap it up as quickly as we can. Clean off the edge of the guy, cap it up. Okay, looks good. This should be enough. In fact, I might have done a little bit too much and I might have gone a little bit too far out, but that's okay. Okay, now it's time for the heatsink, which I've blown out and cleaned. We're going to take off this plastic warning label and immediately install. And if you're wondering about orientation, normally the flat side will go towards the front. You'll notice that there's a side that has a swale in there, sort of. That's going to go on the back. And you can also tell from the logo here, that's normally going to be pointing towards the top, so you could read it. And so we can remove the plastic And you can see the copper at the bottom, and we're going to place it in there now. And this is the real moment of truth here. And this time using a #1 Phillips head screwdriver. Looks like the video's getting a little blurred, but we're going to tighten on both sides a little bit so it catches. And these are spring loaded, so we have to use a little bit of pressure here to actually get the screw threads to catch. This is a very delicate moment because we're using pressure. We don't want to use too much, and we don't want to drop the screwdriver on our delicate components. Okay, so I've screwed it in a little bit on each end just to catch. And now we can tighten it into place here. And just a little bit on each side, going back and forth until we feel that there's some pressure and that we shouldn't use any more torque on it. Going very slowly and carefully with this. This is a critical juncture here. The whole thermal compound and heatsink application. But I think we have it. And we may tighten it a little bit more later. Excellent. That was fun. And to be honest with you, I think it was easier than using those 4-post heatsink attachments. I really like this design. So I'm glad I picked this Arctic Freezer 36 Rev 4 or whatever it is. We'll remove this plastic later. And I'm going to attach the fans in just a little bit. I'm just taking a look right now. And if you actually look at this image here, you can see that the thermal compound, the thermal paste, kind of went a little bit out beyond the heatsink on both ends. I might have applied a tiny bit too much, but the cool thing is it just spills out onto the housing and doesn't go onto the motherboard at all. So that's another benefit of this type of housing. I think I really like this. So very cool. All right. And so I've tightened this up a little bit more as far as I dare go until it won't really tighten anymore. So it looks good right now, and now we can apply the fans on here. And like I said, we have 2 fans. Now, if we look at these, once again, you can see the orientation markings. And we have the arrow here. And if you can't see that, just take my word for it. It's pointing in that direction. And here is the logo. So that's going to go on the front. And one of the cool things is you can rotate these however you like because it has these standoff screws that are going to plug this in basically. So I'm going to do it this way so that the cable's at the bottom and we have plenty of room to plug it in. I actually wouldn't have to. I could go different ways here and wrap it around, but I think we'll do it that way. We could always remove it and change it later. And these just snap into place. So we'll put it on the side here. And always measure twice, right? I'm going to check those markings, make sure the airflow is correct. Align it the way I want, rotate it the way I want. And snap it in place. Beautiful. Put the cable to the side there for a second. And then we'll do the same thing with the other one. Again, we're going to check the airflow. This one has the arrow pointing this way, again with the logo here, but now the standoff screws are on this side. And so we definitely want it to be this way because we want the airflow to go in that direction where I'm pointing. And we'll rotate it so that we have the best chance to plug it in. And again, I might change this. We'll see how it goes. I might do it this way for this one. Okay, put that down. And snap this into place. Make sure all 4 snapped in. And I think we are good to go. Now, I did wait a couple minutes, a little bit, for the thermal compound, the thermal paste to set. And I think that's usually a good idea because we don't want to jostle this too much. But now we're not going to touch it anymore. We're just going to let it set. I'm going to plug in the cables once I do the power for this, and we'll remove the plastic at that point as well. And there you go. That is the installation of the CPU. That was the monster part of building the system, because you don't want to damage the CPU. You want to make sure you apply the thermal compound correctly. You want to have the heatsink ready. Everything needs to be clean. Airflow has to go in the right direction. So a lot of things to think about with that. But I think we've done well here, and I'm starting to get excited to get this system booted up. It's getting fun now. Time for the video card. This is an NVIDIA RTX 3060 MSI card with 12 gigabytes of DDR5. The goal here is to have better rendering with the 12 gigabyte onboard memory as opposed to 8 gig. We'll see. I have the same card in my home build, and I can tell you that for the price, it's great. I've run games at 150 frames per second at 1440p resolution and no hiccups, and never really tested beyond that. Also, all of my OBS tests on that card have been excellent as well. I've been able to record at 1080p and 1440p at 60 frames per second with multiple layers. So it's been pretty good so far. I think it should work well in this computer. Let's install it. Okay, back at the computer here. To install the GPU, we need to remove this warning label from the PCI Express slot, and also remove 2 slot covers, the metal slot covers here, so that they can house that card, because it actually takes up 2 slots. Most video cards do. And so here we have our video card. I always keep it in the anti-static bag and on another anti-static mat that's also grounded to the same place as the mat that this computer's on, and just trying to equalize the electrical potentials as much as possible to avoid ESD. Always check your seal once again. I've already opened this, but always check the seal, make sure it is sealed and doesn't look like it's been tampered with before. And we'll take our video card out. And as with everything else, I'm going to hold it by the edges, by plastic, and by the metal here. And we're going to try not to touch any of the circuitry or the copper that will be exposed once we remove this. So we'll leave that on the anti-static mat until we're ready. And start by removing those slot covers. There's one. Remove the screw, and there's the other. Okay, then we can go ahead and push the locking tab out. So we'll unlock that, and we'll remove this warning cover here. It's really just a sticker. I'm saying cover, but it's a sticker. And they're warning us that there is a button battery. That is here. That's our lithium battery that keeps the settings for the BIOS when the computer's off. And they're basically warning you not to eat those. Not a good idea. So I won't do that. Okay, so now we have the slot unstickered and unlocked, and we have the slot covers open, and we can go ahead and grab our card. I mean, this thing's a computer unto itself. Calling these cards anymore is a little bit weird. But anyways, we need to remove the protector, plastic protector there, and we'll install it. And we're going to install straight down, try to do even pressure so that we don't damage any of the connectors or the slot itself. Okay, and slowly lower that into place, checking that the card is going in correctly, looking from all sides. Looks good. And I'm going to press down, keep it straight, and press down with both thumbs here and here, and press down till it snaps. You probably heard that. And that snap was the lock that was locking back into place on the card. Then we can take our screws and screw the card in. Now when we do this, we want to make sure the card is standing upright properly, So I'm using one finger to kind of hold it in place as I screw it in. Good. And we'll get that second screw in there. All right, tighten them up, but not too much, because if you tighten them too much, the front end could actually pop up a little bit, and we don't want that. All right, so the card is installed. It still needs power, so we're going to need 8-pin power, PCI power, which we'll get once we put in the power supply. And some of these cards can be heavy, and sometimes they'll get weighed down in this direction. So what this particular case gives you is a support bracket, and you can see that here. And we can move this bracket this way and also down, and these little tabs here can hold up the card. If you have two cards, you could put two cards here, and this would help to support those cards, because they can be pretty heavy sometimes, especially the more powerful video cards out there. They can have more weight, they could be longer, and so you have to be ready to support those if necessary. This computer, the motherboard, can only handle one proper GPU, but who knows, maybe you have a motherboard that has the ability to support two powerful GPUs, and you could support both of those here. I'm going to use this. It's not really necessary, but we'll get rid of this tie wrap and then remove the styrofoam here. And you'll note that we have a sticker here with a QR code, which gives you all the information you need to know about the case. Again, always go with your documentation. I'll remove that and stick that onto the styrofoam. And then we have a magnetic cover here that we can remove. And we have a screw that we can adjust here. So this actually has a handle. And we can unscrew this and then move this around. I'll bring it to the closest setting here. Slide that down. All right, so we can move this way. We can also move the arm down if we need to, and we do in this case, because the video card doesn't come up all the way. Move that down a little bit. And I may have to adjust this a little bit more. We'll see how it goes. Tighten that top screw to keep the entire assembly in place once we've found the right location for it. And it's a little finicky getting it in the case, so we have to make sure it's flush here and here. And then we can tighten up the adjustment for the arm. Keep it at that location. Okay, good. And then we can just simply slide this arm up. There we go. And I pushed it a little bit this way, but we want to make sure it's straight. So I'm checking the angle, making sure it's straight in the slot, and it'll stay that way. And now when we move the computer and stand it up, this will lean this way onto this little support, and that'll make it nice and secure, and the video card won't move as much. It's nice and straight, nice and stable. That's good for the circuit board. It's also good for the fans to keep them running properly. We don't need this other slot holder, so I'll snap that back, and we can even remove it because it's not really necessary. If I had a much heavier card, I could use both of the slot holders. I don't know the proper name for those. And then we can press that down and cover this back up with our magnetic cover. The only thing left we need to do is connect power. Again, that 8-pin PCI Express power from the power supply. We'll do that when we connect all the other power devices. And it's starting to come together here. So there's our GPU. Time for the capture cards. Here I'll be installing two single input Blackmagic DeckLink video capture cards. And you can see here I actually have three cards. Now this one here is a 4-port HDMI, and unfortunately I can't use it. I had purchased this first, but then when I designed the computer, I realized it was going to cost a lot more money to get a motherboard that could actually support it. This particular device needs a by 8 PCI Express slots, and the motherboard we're using has a by 16 for the GPU, but the other long slot is actually only by 4. So to actually use this card, I'd need a more powerful motherboard, a real power workstation, CPU, that type of thing. And who knows, maybe I'll do that in the future. But for now, I'm going to be limited to using these two individual cards over here. So unfortunately, this guy is going to go back. Maybe I'll use something like him in the future. But we'll use these two here, and those are single input HDMIs, and they can be used in a by 1 slot, so they should work fine. There's a couple factors that are involved here: Linux, money, and also the hardware. So I could also use a different manufacturer with a 4-port inbound HDMI. Elgato makes one, but it doesn't have drivers for Linux. It does have a sort of out-of-the-box support right now, but apparently there are latency issues and other issues, like I've heard of overheating and failures, and I don't need to mess with that at all. I prefer the Blackmagic components over Elgato for reliability, and also Blackmagic in general is very friendly to Linux, which a lot of the other manufacturers are not. So that's what we're going to go with. The 4-port DeckLink would be great, but again, it would require more powerful workstation. Motherboard, CPU could cost anywhere from $500 to $1,000 more. So I was already at budget with this computer. And this is actually a $600 card, so this is going to save me some money because I was able to get each of these for $125 each. Got a deal on those. So I'm going to save money in general. Who knows, maybe I'll use a 4-port inbound card later. It's something I want, but it's not something I really need. Who knows, maybe in the future I'll build a separate video recording computer. And the computer that I'm building now will be my main workstation. The other one will be the recording workstation, which could use something like this or something even more in depth, and then have OBS run on that and kind of separate everything. You never know. But for now, we're going to use these two capture cards. Installation is pretty easy, so let's go and do it now. All right, so we have two more slots available to us. We have this, which is a full-length PCI Express slot. Unfortunately, it only supports up to by 4. So again, that by 8 4-port HDMI capture card won't work in here, but it will accept by 4 and by 1 cards. And then we have a by 1 PCI slot here as well. Both of these work off of the chipset and not the main CPU. And that's the real reason here. If you want to do real video recording and you want to have lots of ports, be it HDMI or SDI or whatever, you're going to want a second proper PCI Express by 16 slot, which actually uses the CPU. And that would mean a more powerful CPU and a more powerful motherboard. So to do it right, everything becomes more expensive. Like I say, in the future, maybe we'll do that. But for now, we're building this system, and I'm going to remove 2 of the slot covers that line up with the slots that I want to use for these capture cards. Okay, there's the first one. And whatever card you install, they're always facing down, so that's how you look at it for the slot covers. And get rid of that bottom one. Screw. Slot cover, all good. Okay, here is our first card, anti-static bag, and it's sealed. Again, always check the seal. And notice the, this is a great sticker, attention, observe precautions for handling electrostatic sensitive devices. Yes, we are doing that here. I'm all ESD preventioned up. But another one of those precautions is to make sure that you hold cards from the metal edge. Or if you have to, you know, press on the edge of the circuit board. Don't touch any of the circuitry or the connectors, anything like that. But you can see here's the card. Very simple card, basic card. works in a by one slot, so it's a by one PCI, and it has SDI and HDMI. I'll be using the HDMI port for this. So we'll put that in. And we could probably install this because it has that barrel connector on the back. Might be able to install it without even touching the circuit board at all. Let's see. Get that in place. Press down. Nah, we're going to have to press down even pressure so that it goes in evenly into the slot. We'll line that up properly and screw it in. And it's very hard to show because we have the case here in the way, but you always want to check, go from an angle, look from an angle, and make sure that the copper connectors for the card are inserted all the way to the slot. Okay, we'll go for the second capture card and install that in the same manner. Went in one shot, all good, and we'll screw that in. I'm going to hold that up and against the screw so that it stands up straight. Screw that in. Again, not too far with these screws, not too much torque, because it could actually make the card pop out over time. So just enough so it stays and doesn't move around. And there you go. We've got our two cards installed. And here they are from the back. And really starting to come together here. And these cards actually come with a half-height card holder or bracket. And so if you have a smaller system, you could install it that way. Just have to switch out a couple screws, just two screws on there to switch out on the card. So you have half brackets as well. And so my plan here is going to be to use the HDMI output of the GPU. That's going to go out to an HDMI splitter, a powered splitter. One end is going to go out to the monitor that I will be screen capturing off of, and the other end of that splitter will go to this capture card directly. This is the card that's in the by 4 slot, which I'm hoping will perform slightly better than this one. They'll probably be about the same, but I'm going to try it on this one. And this way I'll be capturing the video directly from the video card as opposed to using the screen capture software within OBS. So I'm hoping that that will also increase the frame rate and just the general reliability and performance of the encoding within OBS. So this will be split out to a splitter, one end going to the monitor, one end going to here. This one will have my main camera. That's going to be the input for that. And if I ever need a third one, that'll probably go into one of my HDMI to USB boxes, those converters, and that'll go to a USB 3 port, one of these red ports here. So it looks like it's really coming together from the back at least, but we got to start plugging things in. Now we can move on to the case connectors. This case has several cables that need to be connected to the motherboard, and we call these case connectors usually. They include the front panel connections, meaning the power button and the reset button and the little blue LED lights, that kind of thing, plus USB ports on the front, audio on the front, the fans, and the RGB for the fans as well. So there's a bunch of connections, and we have to really think about how we're going to route those cables so that they will work well and not be in the way of anything else and not be overextended and not have any worry about breaking those cables or damaging them. And so it's all about cable management as well. So let's begin. Okay, so I've turned the case over. So this is the back side of the case. The top is over here, bottom here, the front is over here, and the back here. So we have a lot of cables here, and they're managed through a little chassis here with Velcro. I've undone some of this already so that I can reroute some of these cables as I see fit. So there's a lot to do here. This is where it can get a little bit confusing. One of the first things you want to do is make sure you have the documentation for your motherboard. And so this is the documentation just on my phone here. It's a PDF. It has all the connections one by one listed by name based on what you'll see with the names on the motherboard and images of the connectors and things like that. So make sure you always have your documentation. So we'll start over here at the fan and RGB assembly. This is actually a control board, and this sticker is telling us how to install things properly. I'm going to remove the sticker so that we can see that a little bit better. I may reattach that, not sure. And reattach this tape here just so we can see the board. So we have all the fan connections here, and we have the RGB connections here. We only have two plugged in right now. One goes to the front for the 3 fans in the front, and one goes to the back for the 1 fan on the back of the case. And then we have RGB connections for those as well. They actually leave here from this connection and are routed down here and around. And here's the other end. And you can see these. This one is the fan connector, and this one's the RGB connector. What I'm going to do with these is I'm going to route those right underneath, and there's a hole here right underneath where the motherboard is. Actually, it's on top if you're looking from the other side. And the ports are right there. So that's where I'm going to connect those. If we wanted to add additional fans, we could do that, and we have connectivity here for additional RGB if we wanted to do so, and we can just leave these dangling, but I'll probably clean them up a little bit more. Probably put the sticker back on so it's covered also. But we have lots of ability to add on to this if we wanted to. So that's the first thing, is the fans and the RGB, got to get those connected. Now we have a couple others here. And the first one is the front panel, or F panel. So that's our power button and our reset button and that kind of thing. And then we also have HD audio. There are 2 3.5 millimeter TRS ports on the front for headphones and microphone. And so both of these are also going to get routed down underneath here. And there are ports for those on the motherboard as well. Next, we have 2 other connections that are coming from here, from the front. We have our USB 3.0 connector, and that is for the Type A USB connections. And then here we have USB 3.2, which is for the Type C connector on the front of the case. Those I'm going to route differently. I'm going to be putting those through here and route them around and around the other side of the motherboard. And so the whole idea here is to try to make sure that everything's nice and flat, because we're going to have to put the case wall back on, and make sure that everything is low enough, and make sure everything isn't being crushed. So a lot of cable management is going to go into play here, but I just wanted to show the basics for how I'm going to connect them. There is one other connector that's coming down here, and that is this. This also comes from the fan control board, and that comes from here. This is an SATA connector. This is a male SATA, and so that'll need to connect to an SATA cable that goes to the power supply once we install that. So it's important to have that, otherwise your fans and RGB won't work. And you can see we also have lots of connections here for SATA drives, 2.5-inch drives, and we have some toolless screws, and we can just screw them on if we want to put them in. We could even put in larger 3.5-inch drives, and we have trays for those as well. But I'm not using any of that stuff right now. We're just using the one M.2 drive. And another thing, we can remove this painter's tape here. Want to make sure we're grounded. And our heatsink assembly is all connected to this, so no need to have that tape anymore, and we definitely don't want that there. And you know what, we'll just put the sticker back on here. This will cover up the control board, which is always kind of good. Keep that kind of covered there. And we can start plugging everything in. Like I say, I'm going to go around here with these, and we'll see if that works. And we're going to go underneath with these cables and plug them in one at a time. Okay, so I've taken the USB cables and I've routed them around here through the opening and around the metal so that I can plug them in. And we'll zoom in a little bit here. We'll start with the USB 3.2 connector for that USB-C connector on the front. I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but it's keyed. So it's a foolproof connection. You have to make sure you install it correctly. And I'm going to make sure that keyed portion lines up with the USB, that's the JUSB 4 ports, and make sure it lines up properly in there. We'll bend this over and connect it in. If you hear a click, you're in good shape. So there's our USB-C connection. And here's the USB connector for the Type A ports. And that's going to wrap around as well and go into the JUSB 3 connector. And this one has a tab on it. And you can see the tab in here as well. So we have to make sure we orient it correctly again. And let's try to get a little bit more slack from that so it's not crimping the cable at all. Make sure it looks good and plug it in. This one doesn't snap into place, but that is now connected. Okay, I've turned the case 90 degrees clockwise, and so now you see the adapter cards are oriented this way so that you can see the ports on the bottom of the motherboard here. And on the left, we have the HD audio. That's where we're going to connect our HD audio connector from the case. Then we have fan and RGB connectors here. So our RGB and fanner connectors are going to go there. And on the right, we have the front panel connector. And we have several others that we can use. This is for USB 2. This case doesn't have those, but we have several other connectors, lots of room for advancement and scalability. But let's start connecting those now. We'll start with that HD audio connector. Now with these, you'll notice that one of the pins is filled, so it's keyed, so we know which way to connect it. If you look at the port, you'll see that one of the pins, the second from the left on the top row, is missing. So that's how we would orient it. Now it's a little bit tight. So when you're working in a case like this, you may choose to remove some components. So for example, I'm going to take the second capture card out just so I don't touch the capture card and possibly damage it. And we'll lift that out evenly. Place that to the side. And connect our audio. And that might have been a little hard to see, as are going to be most of these connections. It's hard to get a good angle on this, but we connected that one and it is good. Now we can connect the fan, and we have two fan ports here. And we have sysfan 3 and sysfan 4 over here. I'm going to use sysfan 3. Sysfan 1 and 2 are on the other side of the motherboard. This is easier to use with this case. And so if we go into BIOS, if we want to monitor the fan speed for the case, this is the port we'd look at, sysfan 3. And like I say, I'm routing these through here. These are also aligned in such a way where you have to orient them correctly, and they're keyed. And so we have to turn this over in order to plug it in. I'm looking in from the side in the open slot cover that I just removed that card. That's a good way to do it sometimes. And now that's in there, and we can see it's connected. Looks good. And now we can connect the RGB for the fan. And this one's a version 2. You can see the third pin is filled in, so it's keyed, And so we can't use the first port for RGB. We have to use the second one. And we'll have to orient that properly, again, because it's keyed. And look in from the side here. And that is now connected as well. Last one is our front panel connector. Let's untwist that. This one is also keyed on the top left here. So we have to look for the pin that is missing, which on the motherboard is on the top right. That's JFP1. And we'll go ahead and connect that now. There we go. That is now connected, and the connection looks good. And we just want to make sure everything is flush here. Okay, fantastic. Now, we do still have to connect the fan assembly, but I think I'm going to wait on that until I do the main power connections, because I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to route everything. So I'll leave those out for now, and it'll be connecting those, connecting the main power, also the CPU power. We have two of those over here, and we need power for the GPU as well. So several items to connect. Also the SATA on the back of the case for the fan control board. So more connections to do, but that's basically it for the case connectors, unless I missed something, which is very possible. Now, if you look at the top here, you can see these are all the connections on the top front of the case. Sometimes these can be stretched a little bit, so one of the things I'm going to do is make sure they have enough, they're loose enough so they won't get pulled and possibly damaged. Sometimes you'll see that from the manufacturer, so I'm going to be checking that out as well. I just want to make sure that none of the cables rub against anything else or get in the way of the fans or are pulling too tight, so that we can have a nice long lifespan for this system. A man must also have the power, right? So things changed a little bit. Originally, I bought and was going to use an MSI Mag A850 GL. And that's the same PSU that I used in a recent home build. The problem, that PSU fan just started making some noise on that system. And after only 6 months. So it's going to be RMA'd, returned back to the manufacturer. I don't mess around with opening power supplies. I could potentially fix it, but I don't do that kind of thing. If it starts to fail like that or starts to make noise, in this case, I just send it back and want to get a replacement. So I pivoted to the Seasonic Focus GX-850, and that's shown in the image here. This is a more expensive power supply, a little bit more expensive. Another cheaper option was the Antec GSK-850. Now, I've always had good luck with Antec power supplies. In fact, there is one in my current computer at this moment, and it's been going strong for 10 years. It seems like there's nothing wrong with it, and it's been whisper quiet. It turns out that Antec actually builds, as far as I can tell, Antec builds the GSK-850 PSU themselves. Again, as far as I can tell. So that's another good option in the future. And there are several power supply companies out there that simply rebrand OEM power supplies from places like Seasonic and Delta Electronics, both of which are very reputable manufacturers. It turns out that MSI gets some of their PSUs from Channelwell technology. So OEM models that they put their sticker on, including the Mag A850 GL, again, as far as I can tell. Historically, I prefer Seasonic over Channelwell, so I decided on the Seasonic. But keep in mind, there's a lot of factors involved with whether or not a PSU might fail or make noise. For example, potential damage during shipping, which could manifest itself immediately or later on. Also misuse, maybe damage during installation, overloading, and so on. In addition, there are different tiers of power supplies A quick search on the internet will result in several tier lists for PSUs. And here's one example, and the link will also be in the notes for this in the description for this video. These lists can help you to kind of determine what PSU will be best for you. What's the best performing PSU at different price points? So take all this with a grain of salt, everything I'm saying. There are so many facets to this, and your individual results will vary. As for the replacement, the RMA I'm going to do, I'll keep the extra MSI PSU once I get the replacement, and I'll hold on to that as a backup. It's always good to have a backup. I am actually out of backups right now, so it'll work out just fine. But anyways, what's important here? What's important? The amount of power that you select for your PSU, the wattage rating. I always choose the next higher PSU compared to what is recommended. Over-engineer a little bit? Oh yes. But in the case that I want to upgrade later, I have plenty of headroom. For example, maybe later I might want to add more RAM or a more powerful GPU or a more powerful capture card or additional storage drives. Who knows? The space is there. Now, while using a couple different power calculators, I found that this system, as it stands, should not use more than 700 watts even when maxing everything out. We'll see how that actually works out. While there is a 750 watt model, I felt it was too close to the top end potential usage, so I went with 850 watts. Now remember that a computer does not always use the maximum. In fact, it's usually far less. And you can test how many watts you are currently using with a basic pass-through wattage tester, which I'll show when we're done with the build, or with your UPS if it has a digital display and a watt tester on it, or in the operating system with Linux tools, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at the ports, and then we'll install this beast. All right, so here's our Seasonic Focus GX-850. And we'll open that up. Take a look in here. We've got our IEC power cable, adapter, all of our cables that we need, and the power supply. Just from the packing, I'm already loving this power supply. And we'll remove the power supply from there. Making a little bit of dust, gonna make sure I'm gonna have to clean everything up. And let's zoom in here. This is the back, and we have our IEC port for the power cable, and we have a kill switch, and we also have a hybrid mode button. Okay, the fan is here, it goes on the bottom, and I can see that this is quality fan, quality ball bearings, quality components inside. It's hefty, it's nice, gold rated. There are more expensive power supplies at higher tiers, but this one should do just fine for me. Now, if we look on the other side, the inside, where all the cables will connect, we see we have newer PCI Express 12-pin. We have standard 8-pin for PCI Express and CPU. And then we have our motherboard connections. We have the 18-pin and the 6-pin, collectively 24-pin. Then we have some additional 8 pins for CPU or PCI Express. And then we have our power for SATA and or peripherals or older Molex connections. So everything that we need here. Basically, I'm going to have the main power. We're going to have 2 connections for the CPU. And we're going to have 1 connection for the GPU, and then we need 1 SATA connection, and that should be everything. So more than enough. We can definitely add on here if we needed to. So this should be a good power supply. Let's get it all plugged in. All right, so let's plug in some cables. I took them all out of the bag and undid all the twist ties, and we'll start with main power. Now, if we look at this, we'll see our 24 pin that's going to connect on the motherboard. On the other end, we have it separated as a 18 pin and a 6 pin. So those are what's going to connect to our power supply here. And we'll just connect those in. The 6 pin, click it in, and the 18 pin, click that in. Okay, now we need to do our 2 CPU connections, and I have 2 cables for that here. Now, if you look at these, you'll see one end is labeled PSU. That's going to connect to the power supply unit, and the other end says CPU on it. So we can connect those. I think I'm going to use the bottom here on this side because I think it will orient the best. Not sure, but it should be the best way to run it. So we'll connect one of those now. PSU side, and we have the second here, another one labeled CPU. Any 8 pin will do if it's the right voltage, but good to go with the right labeled ones. Then we know what we're connecting where later on. Okay, next is the GPU. This one has a single 8 pin connector, and so here's our GPU connection. Again, here's our PSU end, and then here's our PCI Express end. And they give you a lot of cables here. We have a bunch. We have an extra PCI Express, and we have another one with a separated 2 pin, just in case you have a 6 pin video card. But this one, I'm going to connect up here. That's going to go to the other side of the case, most likely. And then finally, we have our SATA. Unfortunately, they give you 2 SATA cables. They both have 4 connectors on them. I only need the one, so I'm going to wrap it all back up once I connect it. But we have the PSU side here and the SATA connectors here. So we can use any one of these SATA connectors. I'm going to use the one on the far end. Plug that in. All right, and that is one end of our connections. And generally, what I like to do is I like to try to connect them, make sure it's going to work, and then put the PSU into the case, and then route the cables, if at all possible. Sometimes we've got to screw it into the case and then connect the cables, which can get difficult. But I'm going to try to do it this way with this particular case and see if it works out. I may have to do some additional cable management, but that's always going to be the case, no pun intended, when you're working with these computers. All right, so that is the PSU end, and then we're going to work on the other side. All right, so I started routing all of these cables into the case. We've got the CPU going up here toward the top. We've got the main power going here into this opening, and it's going to wrap around. We've got the GPU connection going through and around. And finally, we have the SATA. I'm going to leave that for last because that's going to connect to our SATA connector, which is right here. Going to see if I can get a little bit more length on that. I don't think we can. So there's going to be some bundles of power cables. You're going to try to clean them up as much as possible. It's a little hard to show all this, but I try to route the cables so that then I can place the PSU in the case and see if it will all fit. We've got some stuff in the way here, and we want to be careful not to damage anything else. Move this on the outside. Pull this out a little bit farther. And, a lot of these cables have a lot of length, so I might kind of mess around with this a little bit to find the best way to run the cables so that they're out of the way of the wall of the case and don't interfere with the other cables, and try to keep them as tight as possible so we can increase airflow in here. But generally, this is what I'll do. And then place that power supply inside. And then we should be able to screw that in. And we can always move it later, right? So we can always make changes if we need to. But I'm going to screw it in now. and there's basically 4 screws on the back, and you can see those 1, 2, 3, 4, and just want to make sure that it's screwed in, and then we can see if we can get the rest of the cables all nicey nice and plugged in on the other end. All right, so I've turned the computer back over. We've got our cables hanging out here. You'll note that I had to remove a couple of the connections here. They were actually in the way going through this little hole, that channel there. The power supply wouldn't get in properly, so I had to remove those. Yet another mistake that I've made during this build. So I pulled the capture card out and pulled those out. Put those back in once we get everything done, and I'll route those other cables in this other channel over here. So we've got a bunch of connections, right? Well, not a bunch, really just 4. And here is our PCI Express connection. We'll start with that, and that's just going to connect right to our video card. And always watch for the tab on the cable. You want that to match up with the tab so it'll lock on the port, and we'll plug that in now. Okay, now you have to have a cable for power, so you've got to have one somewhere, and then I'll do my best to make this look nice and clean. Probably hide it away like this, something like that. We'll see. That's just more cable management that we'll do later. Now we have also the CPU power, and we ran those through the top here. And let's zoom in on those guys a little bit. 2 8-pin CPU ports. Need that dual power here. And these are the same types of connectors. You're going to have that locking tab like we did on the video card here. And so we'll connect those one at a time. Snaps into place. Make sure the locking tab, which is toward the top of the motherboard, clicks into place. And we'll do that second one. And we are good. There we go, CPU power. Drag the computer over here a little bit, and we'll zoom out a tiny bit here. Okay. Get these fan cables out of the way. Need to do that as well. And here is our 24-pin. That's going to connect to the motherboard. That is the main power. We have the locking tab here on the motherboard. That is on this end. So that's why I routed it this way, so I can kind of wrap it around this metal arm here, or bracket, if you will, and plug it in. Even pressure on both ends until it clicks into place. And that actually required a good amount of force and bent the motherboard a little bit. Now, I might have mentioned before, some people like to build everything in the motherboard and then place it in. Other people don't, but regardless, the power connection kind of has to be done afterward because you have to route it through the case. So just want to make sure that it's flush in there. And I'll get a little photo of that because it's hard to see. But we'll zoom in a little bit further there. And there's our connection. Our dragon's in the way here. That's okay. It's okay, dragon. That's going to light up later if we did everything right. Should be lots of fun. One of the fun parts of the build. All right, cool. So that's those connections. Now I also have to take care of the fans because we haven't done that yet. And so for these CPU fans, we have 2. On the motherboard, you'll see 2 fan ports here. Unfortunately, we can only use one. We're going to be using this one. This is the actual CPU fan. This one is meant to be as a pump fan, if you have a pump system. We could use both, but the cool thing is the Arctic cooler that we got allows us to daisy chain these. So I'm going to attempt that first, and they're always going to run at the same speeds anyway. So we'll daisy chain them and have them connect to the CPU port here, right here, and then the BIOS will be able to recognize those and tell us the speed. Okay, so we'll daisy chain these 2 together. This is the back one, and we'll connect that female connector to the male connector over here and plug that in. Good. Onto the front one. And then on the front fan, we have the female connector. That's going to go to the board. and these are keyed. So I'll plug that in now. A little hard to reach in and get it and see while keeping my fat head out of the shot. So fun stuff. All right, cool. So that is plugged in. That should work, and that should power both fans. And I'm going to tie these up. Sometimes I'll use the sealing here of the case, and they have these little spots where you can actually tie things on there and keep the cables lifted and away so we have as much airflow as possible. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Again, a lot more cable management to do. If we zoom out here, we'll see, you know, we have extra cables. We've got to fix the ones down here, put the card back in. So there's a lot more cleanup to do here. And I'm going to do that off camera and then show the finished product. Time to clean up the system and boot it up. And so we're going to do some cable management and make sure everything is plugged in and check it on both sides of the case and really route all the cables so that they are secure. And then we'll boot it up and see if everything works. Let's go. Okay, we did some cable management here, and I tied off a lot of these. For example, the fan cables for the CPU, tied them off to the top here. Also tied off the GPU power, and just making sure everything is routed nicely and secure and won't move around inside the case. Also reconnected that HD audio and the fan connectors and replaced that capture card. And generally tightened everything up, all the screws and all the connections and the hardware, just to make sure that everything is nice and stable and secure. I used some of the Velcro straps that came with the case and the motherboard, also tie wraps that came with the heatsink and also the case. And now you see here we have this sticker on the heatsink. We can remove that as well. There we go. Don't need that. And I am liking that heatsink so far. We'll see how well it functions and how quiet it is. Okay, here's the other side of the case, the back, so to speak, behind the motherboard. And so I've done a lot of cable management here, kind of rerouted the CPU cables, and made the connection for the fan control board via SATA power to the power supply. So that control board's connector ended here, and we had a female to male connection for the power supply there. And then kind of rerouted some stuff, made sure that everything is flush and flat so the case wall won't damage anything when I put it on. And also making sure that nothing's too tight in any direction. You don't want to be pulling too hard on any of the cables and want to make sure we avoid damage. But also making sure that they are secure, tightening the Velcro and everything else so that nothing really moves when we move the computer itself. So everything looks pretty nice and secure. I also took out these 3.5-inch hard drive bays that were in here. That should allow for additional airflow. They're not really needed, and so we'll leave those out. And that's about it. So everything's looking good with the cable management on both sides. Now we can go ahead and boot this thing up. Okay, this is the moment of truth. I've plugged the computer in, I've connected a monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse, and turned on the kill switch, and we should be able to boot this system now. So let's hit the power button. And there we go. And it is booting up now. You can see the LED lights and the fans turning. And we get into the BIOS. Sometimes you might need to press a key the first time, like F1, or press the delete key to get into the BIOS. But it has entered the BIOS, and we're looking good. It sees the CPU at 3.4 gigahertz. And I'm looking at all the fans right now. All 3 fans on the front are working. The 2 fans on the CPU are working, and the back fan. And we've got all the LED lights. I looked underneath. The GPU fans are working. So everything looks good. And the next step is to go into the BIOS and start making some changes. and modify the settings and update the BIOS as well. So this is definitely exciting. All that work coming together, and the system boots and looks good. Okay, time to work with the BIOS. We're going to access the BIOS once again, and the first thing we'll do is update the BIOS. Very important to update it. This is known as flashing the BIOS. So I'll show where to grab the file for the BIOS flash, put that on a USB flash drive, and then boot into that with the M-Flash utility for this MSI motherboard. Then once that's done, if it goes through successfully, we'll increase the RAM speed, because currently it's at, I think, 4,800, and we can go as high as 5,600. So we'll increase that. Then we'll check the fans and the temperatures and make sure everything's good with those, and then we'll apply an administrative password to the BIOS to protect it a little bit. Let's get going. Okay, so first thing I want to do is update the BIOS. To do that, we have to get the file for the flash update, and you do that at the motherboard manufacturer's website. So I'm at the MSI site, and I've already gone to the MAG B760 Tomahawk Wi-Fi page. We're going to go to Support, and then we want Drivers and Downloads. And right when we scroll down here, you'll see automatically we're in BIOS. And the top one on the page here is going to be the latest BIOS, 7D96VAD. And that was released in August of this year. 10 megabytes, and it downloads as a zip file that we have to extract and place onto a flash drive. Now, a couple things about this. You want to make sure you get the latest full version of the BIOS. So you have all the updates and all the security updates and microcode and all that good stuff. Now, if we scroll down here, sometimes you'll see beta versions. I normally stay away from beta versions unless it's absolutely necessary that we have to update the motherboard with it. That's very rare, and so I stay away from beta versions. I want the full version and the latest one, and that is this one right here. So we're going to download that right now, and I created a directory in my downloads called BIOS MSI, and we'll save it right there. And we'll extract that now. Now, a couple things. First of all, I've placed a USB flash drive into a USB port. And by the way, I'm running Linux right now on my current system. This is Debian SID, but generally Linux will be the same. And here we have GNOME disks. And what I do normally is I will format the flash drive as FAT. So I've done that already. And you can see that here. It's set up as FAT. That's the file system. And I've mounted it so we can copy our file over to that. So that's just a little tip. Normally I'll use FAT or something similar to that, because that'll normally work with BIOS updates, and BIOS systems will recognize it. So now I'll hop over to Dolphin, and you can see in my downloads in BIOS MSI, here is the zip file. I'm going to extract that here, and then I'll make a folder, and you'll see a text file with instructions and also the BIOS file itself. I want to place that onto the flash drive. So on the left side here, I have Dave's data open, and you can see that on the bottom here. And so that is the USB flash drive. I'm just going to copy that guy over there. And there we go. We want it right in the root of the flash drive, and we want it to have that proper extension. Now, you may say, well, Dave, how do you know this is the correct BIOS? Well, I made sure that I was at my correct motherboard, the MAG B760 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. There are similar boards to that. However, what most manufacturers do is they'll use different file extensions for the BIOS names. So one motherboard will have different file extensions than others. And so it's hard to brick your motherboard with the wrong BIOS flash update nowadays, because this extension here will be different. All right, so that is good, and we can safely remove that guy. And now we can go ahead and do the update. Okay, so we had unmounted the USB flash drive from the system where I did the download, and I've plugged the USB flash drive into our new system here. Now, before we start the update, let's just take a look. If you look over here, you'll see that the BIOS version is i7-13700K. .A70. And it has a BIOS build date of 1/11/2024. So over a year and a half old. So obviously you can see why we would want to go with the new update here. And you can see the difference in age. This is a year and a half newer, a little more. And we can see the different version number as well. And you can compare that. Here we're at 7D96VAD. That's what we have downloaded. And here on the system, we see 7D96IMS. So this is an older one, and we definitely want to get rid of that. And you'll see the new BIOS version and the BIOS build date when we finish the flash update. So let's do that now. To do so, we'll go to mFlash. And it says the system will auto reboot and enter flash mode. Do you want to enter flash mode? Yes, I do. And we'll give that a moment to reboot. And you can see it says enter flash mode. There we go. We are in, and it automatically, when it goes into flash mode, it'll automatically look for USB flash drives. That's where it's going to expect to see the flash file. And it does see my SanDisk USB flash drive. And here is the new BIOS update. And you couldn't really see the full version number on the main BIOS screen, but you can see it here. The original from January 11th, 2024 is version VA.70. And now the new one that we've downloaded here, which had a build date of July 31st and a release date of August 27th, interestingly enough, that's VA.D0. So definitely newer. This is in hexadecimal. So 708090A0B0C0D0. So we're well ahead in these versions of the BIOS. And you want to make sure that that is indeed the case, that you're going to be getting a newer BIOS and that it will be compatible with your motherboard. The model name is the same. The version is a newer version number. And so that is exactly what we want here. And it says, are you sure you want to select this file? Yes. Click yes, and the BIOS will be updating now. So they tell you don't shut down or restart your system. Obviously, you don't want to do that until the BIOS update process is completed. And, you know, really a good idea as well to not do this during thunderstorms or lightning storms, or if you feel like you might have some power issues, or if you do, you can use a UPS as well. And that will give you power just in case. And I always keep my systems connected to UPSs. And we'll just fast forward through while this finishes the update. All right, so we're booted back into the BIOS and everything is looking good. If you look at the upper right-hand side, you will see there that we have the new BIOS version. Previously, it was .A70. Now it's .AD, as in David, 0. And the BIOS build date is 7/31/2025, so much newer. And it looks like the flash has gone through properly and all is good. Now we can move on to changing some of the BIOS settings. Okay, so there's so much that we could talk about when it comes to the BIOS. For example, our CPU, it's running at 3.40 gigahertz. The base clock is 100 megahertz, and we're running a multiplier of 34. That brings us to 3.4 gigahertz. But we could increase the base clock because we can do overclocking on this system. I'm not going to do it right now, perhaps in the future, but that would allow us to go beyond 3.4 gigahertz as a default speed. Now, this particular chip has Intel Turbo Boost technology, so it'll actually go beyond this if need be by itself, but we could actually increase the base clock in addition to the Turbo Boost technology. So there's a lot that you can do in the BIOS to make your system perform better. Now, one of the things I'm interested in, this is very important, is the memory. So if we click on memory here, we'll see right now it's set to 4800 megahertz or mega transfers per second. And this RAM has the ability to go faster than that. And you can see that we have different XMP profiles that are set up for the motherboard here. 4800, 5200, and 5600. Well, 5600 is what I want because this RAM can handle that. And if we take a look at our motherboard here, if we go back to the motherboard and go to specifications and scroll down here, you can see the memory section. This motherboard can handle as high as 7,000 megahertz, but it definitely does 5600, and that's what we want. So I'm going to set it up as 5600. Now your motherboard has to support that speed, so does the CPU. So that's very important. If we go to our i7-13700K processor and scroll down to memory specifications and make that a little bigger, you'll see here up to DDR5 5600 mega transfers per second, and Intel's actually using the proper name there. So that is what we can do. So this is what I purchased. I purchased 5600 RAM, and I got a motherboard and CPU that could support it. And so that's what we're going to do. The motherboard could go beyond that. You could also do overclocking of RAM, but we're just going to set it to 5600. So we'll go back to this BIOS screen here, and we look at the profiles, basically. The profile I want is profile 1, 5600. And so we'll click on 1 here, and that should change the profile for us, and it should take effect after we restart. So I'm just going to click on the X up here, and it says, save configuration for the new profile, yes. And we'll let that reboot. And just fast forwarding through here, now that'll normally take a minute or two to complete that task. And so now you can see on XMP profile, the 1 is in red. If we go to memory, now we're at 5600 megahertz. And it appears to be working. So that's one of the main configurations I wanted to do here, because I want to take advantage of that RAM. By default, quite often, motherboards will set to the lower speed and the lower voltage. And that's something to keep in mind. The lower speed was at 1.1 volts. Now we're going to be hovering around 1.25 volts. So using a little bit more electricity, creating a little bit more heat, something to think about there. So there you go. We've increased the memory speed, and we'll move on. Next on the list is checking our fans and our temperature. And if we click here on fan info, we'll see a couple things. And by the way, you can do this with the keyboard as well if you wish. Just a little bit easier to show with the mouse and the pointer. But we can see the CPU fan right now. That's at 888 RPMs or thereabouts. And the CPU core temperature is at 36 degrees Celsius. Anything in the 30s is just fine. And then if we look at system fans over here, you'll see 1 is not showing anything, 2 is not showing anything. That's because we connected it to port 3 on the bottom of the motherboard, because that was an easier location for me to place the cable in. And we said we'd be able to find it, and here it is. And we're at about 1100 RPMs and 36 degrees Celsius. So we're in good shape there with the motherboard. Keep in mind that the case is open right now. I haven't closed it up. It'll probably run more efficiently once I do so. And so I keep it open until I'm sure that everything is working and get the operating system installed and hardware is working properly, just so I don't have to keep opening the computer. But that's just me. So let's move on here. We can also go to the hardware monitor down here. If we click on that, that'll bring up a separate screen, and you can get a little bit more information. You have your CPU here. If you have a pump fan, you would see that. Any other system fans that you might add. And bigger graphs, more information, and we can see the CPU, the socket, the system, a lot of different information here. And you can click on your system fans, whatever you have connected, to see how they're doing over time. If you're interested in more information about the CPU socket, the system. So a lot more information in this hardware monitor here. Close back out of that and come back here. If we go to our memory, we can see the memory's temperature. We're at 37 and 38 degrees Celsius for both these Kingston sticks of RAM. And the other important part is our storage drive. So I'm going to click on storage. And you can see it is here, Samsung SSD. It's a 990. It just cut off the 0, and it is 2 terabytes. So it sees that in the first M.2 slot. So M.2_1, that's the first slot. And we're not using any SATA drives, but if you had those, they would show up here. All I'm using for now is this. We might add another M.2 into the second slot later on. Who knows? But want to make sure that that drive is present because we need to install our operating system real soon. You can also add favorites here. You can turn the audio on and off. You never know. You might want to use external audio. You have easy LED control, which you can turn on and off. So lots of fun stuff here that you can work with. Also, if you press F7, it'll get you to the advanced mode where you could click up here. And then you could go into your overclocking settings, additional hardware monitoring, and additional motherboard settings. If we do that, we can show the last thing I wanted to do here, which is applying a administrative password. And so lots of stuff that we can work with here in system status, advanced, boot, but I want to go to security and click on administrative password. So we'll do that now. And we'll type in the administrative password, press enter, and confirm it. And I'm just going to jot that down for now so I don't forget it. And this way, if anybody was to try to get into the BIOS and make any changes, they won't be able to because they won't know the password unless I leave the password lying around somewhere for them. And you have a lot of other security stuff here: UKey, trusted computing, chassis intrusion, secure boots, and so on and so on. So get to know the BIOS for your specific motherboard. You may be able to get it to work faster, more efficiently, use resources better, run cooler, and so on and so on. So definitely check out your motherboard's BIOS and its documentation on the internet. And that's about it for the BIOS. Next, we move into the operating system. All right, time for the operating system. Here we'll install Linux on our computer. I'll show how to download the ISO image for the Linux operating system. We'll copy it to a flash drive. Then we'll go through the entire installation process, and then we'll continue to updating the system. So for this build, I chose Ubuntu Linux, and some of you out there watching might be surprised by that, especially considering that I've been running Debian SID on my main workstation for quite a while. And while it's considered by some to be the Linux distro for noobs or newbies, and also their parent company, Canonical, has made some questionable choices in the past, I still feel it's the best option for me with what I want to accomplish and for hardware and software support in this particular scenario. In this particular scenario, I think it'll work best. I've tested on Ubuntu on my home system with what I want to do, and I've done that fairly extensively, and I think it will work out pretty well. However, any Linux distro would do quite nicely. The difference between one and another Linux distro is very slight. And I did test heavily with Debian SID, what else? Arch Linux, Fedora, Linux Mint, and some others. And I run all those in my lab, and I have done so for many years. But I feel that Ubuntu is the right tool for the job for this particular system. Opinions will vary, but that's my choice here. Also, the Linux distro of choice for me could change at any time. And that's why I'm separating the home partition, and you'll see that when I do the install. This way I can install or reinstall any Linux distro whenever I want and still have access to my user directories. So that's about it. Let's get started with the operating system installation. Okay, so the first step is to download the Ubuntu operating system. I'm installing Ubuntu Desktop. Now with Ubuntu, they have separate OSs for server, which I use a ton with customers and here in my lab, but they also have the desktop side, and that's what we're going to install to this PC. So we are at the Ubuntu page, and I'm here at Ubuntu 24.04. Now, normally I'll go with LTS so that I have that long-term support, at least 5 years. I'm not going to really mess around with any of the other versions, so we'll go for 24.04, and as of the recording of this video, they're up to 0.3, and we'll download that now. Okay, and I want to download that to a directory in my downloads here in Ubuntu. And so this is it, Ubuntu 24.04.3 desktop for AMD 64. That's what we want. You got to make sure you have the right platform, and it is a ISO file. So we'll save that there. And that's going to take a little bit, so we'll let that download. All right, and so we've downloaded that. That was about 6 gigs, so it took a little bit, and we just fast forwarded through there, and we've got our ISO image here in our downloads directory. And so what I want to do is I want to apply that to a USB flash drive. And you can use a variety of tools for this. The tool I'm going to use is Etcher, and there's other ones out there. You might also choose to go with Rufus or Ventoy. I like using Etcher on Linux systems, and this works well here, but it depends what OS you're working with or what tool you like the most. So I'm going to use this, and we'll select Flash from File. And we can go to this recent file that we just downloaded here. And that is our ISO. Click open for that, and then we need to select the target. I already have the flash drive plugged in, so we'll select that now. And we can see it here, SanDisk Ultra, Dave's Data, 30.8 gig. And we'll select that, and we'll click on Flash to begin the process. Okay, and you can see behind the scenes here, the current location changed for Dave's Data. It's no longer accessible from my file management tool, Dolphin, but that's because Etcher has now taken over here. And we'll just fast forward while that is continuing on. Okay, so we've completed the flash and it was validated. Looks good. We should have our Ubuntu installation all set up. We'll close out of Etcher here. And now you can see the drive is actually called Ubuntu down here. And you can see all the directories that were created in there from EFI to install and everything else. Now, that's the thing. You start with an ISO file, but you can't just copy that to a flash drive. You have to actually flash it to a drive. You have to actually extract the contents so it looks like an installable operating system. And so that's what we have here, and we should be able to boot directly off of this drive on our new system. Okay, so let's eject this USB flash drive. We'll safely remove it by clicking here, and then we can go ahead and disconnect that. We'll plug it into the other system, and I'm also going to connect some networking as well, the wired and wireless, and we'll get started with the install. All right, so here's the system. It's booted to the BIOS right now, and I've connected the USB flash drive. I also attached the antennae to the wireless connection on the motherboard for wireless access, and also a wired connection to the RJ45 port. And at this point, we should be able to boot directly off of the USB flash drive. If we had to, we could change our boot order here if need be, but there's nothing on the storage drive yet, so it should look for the USB flash drive, and we just should have to restart, and it should boot off of that. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm just going to hit the reset switch. Actually, we'll just close out of the BIOS and say yes. All right, and that reboots and automatically sees the USB flash drive. And we have options here. I want to try or install Ubuntu. So press enter for that and get started with the installation. All right, and that took a minute or so to get to the preparing Ubuntu screen, so we just kind of fast forwarded through that. And now we can go through the install here. We're going to choose English as our language, and I'm going to leave the accessibility as is. Click Next. English keyboard layout, US English, that is. And next for that. And for now, we have an option. We can use wired connection or Wi-Fi. I'm going to select the wired connection for now. We'll get the Wi-Fi set up afterwards. And click Next for that. And it says an update is available for the installer, which we just downloaded. But I'll update that now. And if we wanted to, we could play around with it because this is a live CD, so to speak. It's a live USB flash image that we could work with Ubuntu and test it if we wanted to. But I'm going to just start up that install again, and we'll do the same options we just did. Okay, and at this point we have the option for interactive or automated installation. I'm going to do interactive so we can do a guided step-by-step, but if I was doing this for a customer, I might use automated installation, say if I was installing it to multiple systems and I had a setup file for that. But we'll do interactive and click Next. And it's asking what apps would you like to install to start with. You could do the default selection, or we can do an extended selection. I'm going to go extended because I'm going to probably want some additional stuff that Ubuntu does have to offer from their repositories, and click Next. Also, it's asking install recommended proprietary software. Now, you can use the built-in Nouveau driver for graphics, which is good, but I'm going to need to go beyond that. I'm going to need the NVIDIA drivers and also the Wi-Fi drivers, so we're going to click on that. And we're also going to install support for additional media formats like MP4 and so on. And we'll click Next for that. Okay, at this point we have two options. We can erase the disk and install Ubuntu. You also have advanced features there where we could use different type of disk types, LVM, ZFS, but I'm going to stick with ext4 for this, so we'll cancel out of that. But I do want manual installation because I want to customize the partitions. I want to have that separate home partition. And so we'll select that radio button and click Next. All right, so we're going to manually partition this drive. Now, the first thing down here we see is device for bootloader installation. We need to know what device we're going to install the bootloader to. That is going to be on the NVMe drive. So we'll click that now, and that creates a FAT32 partition and a mount point of /boot/EFI, and it makes that 1.13 gig. That is what we need. We need that boot partition in order to be able to function and actually boot the system to Ubuntu. Now we'll go to our free space, and I'll create the two partitions that I want. And we'll click the plus sign here. And the two partitions that I want are a root partition, which is where the operating system will be installed, and a separate home partition for all my user accounts. Really, it's just my main dpro account that I'm interested in, but any other accounts will also be stored there. When you work with data, your data by default will be stored in your user account, and that can get really big. So that's going to be the larger partition. But we'll start with the root partition, and you can change your format, your file system type, ext4, XFS, ButterFS, VFAT, and so on. I'm going to be using ext4 for these. And I want this to be 400 gigabytes out of the 2 terabyte drive. So we could calculate that as megabytes, or we could just select gigabytes here, and we'll change that over to 400. That should be enough for the operating system and many years worth of updates and applications that I install. Everything else and the bulk of everything is going to go into that home partition. So we'll create this now, click OK, and now we have our 400 gig home partition. Now we'll go ahead and create another one inside of free space. We'll create another one. We have 1.6 terabytes left, and that is exactly what I want to use. I want to use all of it for my home partition. So we'll just leave it as that, click OK, and there you go. There is our new partition table. And you can see here the red area is the root partition, and the green area is the home partition, and they're all labeled here. Plus we have our boot partition. That's everything that we should need. Now we can go way more in depth with this, and we can do other types of partitions, but this should be good enough for my purposes for this system, and that should be good. So we're going to click next. Okay, and I've already applied my basic information here, my name, computer name. So my name's DPro, computer name NW2, and I've applied a password, and we're requiring that password to log in. Not using Active Directory, not connecting to any Microsoft domains or any free IPA or identity management in Linux domains, but we could always add that in the future if we needed to fairly easily. So we'll leave that, click next. We are in the New York City area, so I'm going to leave that as my time zone, and next. And now we have the review stage here. It's a manual installation. We're installing to the NVMe drive. We've got an extended selection for applications, so it's going to install more stuff. I'm not using any disk encryption, and we have our partitions here. Just double checking these, always double check these things when you're finishing everything up. And we'll go ahead and click install. There we go. That's going to start copying files and go through some nice features and interesting stuff that you can find in Ubuntu. And that's the noble Numbat logo here. Very interesting. And so that installation of the system is going to go through. And I'm actually just going to pause the video until that completes. Okay, so the Ubuntu installation is done. We can now restart, and I'll pull the USB flash drive, and it should boot to the NVMe drive with the new Ubuntu install. So click restart now, and we'll pull that USB flash drive. And it says, please remove the installation medium, and press enter, which I just did. Fast forward through the reboot. And there we go, we've rebooted and we're at our login screen, and it shows DPro. I can press enter for that and type in our password, and we are in. All right, so it says welcome, and first thing I want to do is kind of make this a little bit easier for all y'all to see. So right click over here and we'll go to our display settings, bring that up, and we'll change it to 200%. And apply it, and we'll keep those changes. Okay, good. So now everything will be a lot bigger, easier for you to see. We are running a 1080p. However, you'll notice that the refresh rate is a measly 29.97, and that's because I have this system connected to one of those HDMI to USB converter boxes. One of the things that I'm essentially trying to get away from with this new system. So that's not very good. The refresh rate isn't good, and also it won't display on the monitor that's connected out of it because the monitor wants 60 hertz. So we're going to have to fix that. The best way to do that, really, and I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and install No Machine, which is what I use to remotely control all of my systems on the LAN and also virtual machines. And so this way we'll be able to run at a higher refresh rate, and I'll be able to easily control it from my main system as we do the work that we need to do here. So we'll leave it at 200% for now, and later we'll probably get GNOME tweaks and do that a little bit better. Okay, let's go to Firefox, and we'll go to No Machine and No Machine download. And we'll modify everything here as far as browsers and search engines as we go. This is a fresh install, and we'll select download now for Linux. And you have to select the correct one. We don't want RPM because that's going to be Red Hat and so on. We want the Linux deb file. And everything's a little twitchy right now, the mouse and the video, because we don't have all the drivers set up just yet, but we'll get there. But for now, let's download this. And you can see it works up to Ubuntu 24.10. It actually does work with higher. I've used it. But we'll download that now. Not very fast download speed, so we're going to have to work on the local area network connection as well. And if we go to show all downloads, you'll see it here. Now this is a .deb file, so we're going to have to run this from the command line. So we'll open up a terminal. All right, and with Ubuntu, you could do that with Control-Alt-T as the keyboard shortcut. That's a built-in default. I use that on just about all my Linux systems, Control-Alt-T. And you can see that I'm here in the terminal as dpro at NW2. So fantastic. Let's change over to the downloads directory, and inside there we see no machine. So we'll run that. We'll do a sudo dpackage -i on no machine .deb, press enter, type in our password, and install that package. At that point, it runs on port 4000, and it's now broadcasting out, so I should be able to connect to it from my main system. But what I want to do is I want to reboot the computer without the USB/HDMI converter box and just connect it normally to a monitor so that it'll see it properly, and we can run everything correctly at the right refresh rate. So I'm going to pause here and we'll do that. Okay, so I rebooted the system and connected a monitor back to it, got it off of that USB to HDMI converter box, and running no machine on my main system here, my current main system that we're still using. And it sees NW2 running Ubuntu 24.04.3. So let's double click on that. We'll say OK. And we'll connect as my user account. And OK, and it's going to give some messages here. We're going to scale it. Just going to go with all the defaults here. There we go. There is the Ubuntu system. Go full screen on that. Close this. Awesome. It actually reset everything back to 100%. So we could change that back to 200% if we wanted to, or we could install GNOME tweaks. That is, if it's not installed already. Let's run it. And not installed yet, but let's go ahead and get that installed. I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. I'm going to do a sudo apt install GNOME tweaks, because GNOME is the desktop that Ubuntu uses by default. And we can install some tweaks to it. It's one of the first things I do on systems, as you can see. And now we should be able to run it. There we go. And if we go to fonts and go down to scaling factor, we can increase that. And I'll just type in the number. Usually I go to something like 1.5. That looks pretty good. You can see the text a little bit better. Maybe we'll go even more. We'll go to like 1.75. Good. Excellent. Close out of that. And now we can decrease the size of our text in the terminal. So GNOME tweaks is definitely helpful for being able to do things like this. It does all kinds of stuff like startup applications and so on. And my apologies, couldn't see the command I just typed there. It was gnome-tweaks. I was in the way. My big fat head was in the way. So there we go. We've got that taken care of. And now we can go and do the updates that we wanted to do on this system. And so that's going to be a sudo apt update, $& sudo apt upgrade. And we'll press enter, and we'll see what types of updates we have available to us with this Ubuntu installation. And it shows all the packages that will be upgraded. So we'll say yes to this. We'll run that now. Okay, and that has completed. And we can see the Linux kernel we're running right now, 6.14.0-32. And so that is good. Relatively new kernel for Linux, for Ubuntu that is. And so I'm happy with that. But we need to do more work on here. We need to get drivers installed. We got to work with the networking and the video, and then get OBS installed. So lots to do. But that's about it for the operating system installation. It seems to be working and working well. All right, time to get into the networking. We're going to show the wired and the wireless networking cards. We're going to change the IP address on the wired one from dynamic to static, and we'll ping a website. We'll do a speed test and connect our Wi-Fi all together, and then check everything with a couple different commands. So let's get into the networking now, and go back to our Ubuntu system here. And we didn't go through the welcome screen yet, so I'll do that now. Click Next and enable Ubuntu Pro. I'm not going to do that, but you can upgrade for free with this and get security updates for 10 years instead of 5. Plus, you can do a lot more with that, but I'm going to skip for now. And they're asking about helping improve Ubuntu. I'm not sharing system data with the team for this particular system. We'll click Next for that. And it says get started with more applications. Obviously, we can use tons of applications out there. I'm going to be adding a lot of stuff. We'll talk about apps a little bit more later, but we're just going to click finish with that and be done with that. And let's go ahead and open the terminal once again. And let's run through some of the networking. So the first thing I want to do is run an IPA command. That's short for IP address show. And when we do so, we'll see the local loopback. That's just internal. Here's our wired card, ENP4S0. That's the built-in RJ45, the NIC on the motherboard. And we see the wireless, WL01. Now, the wireless is not set up yet. It's not connected to an actual system as of yet. There's no wireless connection. But ENP4S0 is connected, and that's how we did all of our installations before. Everything was connected through the wired connection, which is what I will be using as my primary. One of my hopes was to have a second wired connection, but because I'm using those 2 video capture cards, I have no slots left. I could also do a RJ45 to USB connection, but I don't think it's really going to be necessary. I think the one connection will be enough because in reality, on my main system right now, that's really all I use. I have other connections, but it's really 98% of what I use. So it should be fine, and we'll have the wireless as a backup. All right, so right now, ENP4S0 is getting an IP address automatically, and it's getting that from a DHCP server. And we see dynamic here, so we know it's getting it from a DHCP server. It's a dynamically assigned address, and it's 10.42.210.34. However, I want to use a static address, so I always know what it is, and I know it'll never change, and I can easily connect to it from other systems. And so I'm going to do that now. We could do that in the GUI. If we go to Settings, and go to Network, we'll see our wired connection. Now, right now, this is connected at 1,000 megabits per second or 1 gigabit per second, and that's okay. But I mentioned I did get a 2.5 gigabit switch, and this network connection on this computer is also 2.5 gig. So at some point, I'll update that, and it should show the higher speed at that point. But it is enabled. And if we click on the settings, we'll see the IP address and everything else. And if we go to IPv4, we could change that to manual here. And we could make the change for this card. And I'll just do it here to start. Now, when we run webinars and do a lot of Linux stuff with servers, we'll do it with the nmcli command or other commands, and we'll do it in the command line. And that's important for servers because they don't have a desktop. But this computer has a desktop, so we may as well make use of it. So we're going to set it to manual, meaning a static IP address, and I want it to be 10.42.0.240. That's what this guy's going to be. Now, you saw probably the /16 when I did the IPA. That is the equivalent of 255.255.0.0. And the gateway address is 10.42.0.1. That is my gateway. It's also the DHCP server and firewall and so on and so on. We'll also go to DNS, and that is also 10.42.0.1. And that's really all we need. We need to set it to manual, IP address, netmask, gateway, and DNS. And we'll apply it. Now, when I do so, I'm going to lose my connectivity via no machine. So we'll have to reconnect that to the new address. And so we'll go back to no machine, edit my connection. Oh, it changed it automatically. Now see, that's slick, right? I actually did not need to close out of that. No machine is pretty slick there. Good stuff. So let's just reconnect. I am not saving the password for this machine in no machine because in reality, this system later, I'm not going to allow much connectivity to it. I'm going to really shut it down because it's going to be my main workstation. So not saving the password there. For my mains workstation, I use a different password, and I don't want it to be stored anywhere, if at all possible, other than where it needs to be. All right, so that's it. That is changed. Now, if we go back to our terminal and run that IPA command again, we'll see the IP address has been changed. Now, if I wanted to run that with within the terminal, in Ubuntu desktop, you would use the nmcli command, and you would do this with a lot of systems in Linux. And we use this a lot on servers as well. Now, if we just run the nmcli command by itself, we'll see the various networking connections. Here's the wired connection, ENP4S0. And according to Network Manager, it's called NetPlan ENP4S0. Now, really, with Ubuntu 24, Network Manager, which is all nmcli and all that stuff, the Network Manager service works in conjunction with NetPlan, so it's an interesting setup. But that would be the Network Manager name. And then down here, we see the wireless WLO1 is disconnected. It doesn't have a connection to a Wi-Fi network yet. Okay, but we could go beyond that with the nmcli command. We could do something like nmcli connection modify and then specify the connection, like netplan this. I just press the tab key and it auto completes it. And then we would state a lot of arguments, like IPv4.method would be manual, and IPv4.address would be 10.42.0.240, and so on and so on. Get myself out of the way there. And more arguments for gateway and DNS and so on. And we cover this kind of stuff in my webinars for Linux networking and also in other videos, but that's essentially how you would do it. But at this point, we have the connection for our wired device, and you can see it here as well when you do an nmcli. So nmcli or IPA works on this system on Ubuntu desktop. nmcli will not work by default on, say, an Ubuntu server and several other types of systems. Ubuntu server uses NetPlan and Network D, whereas Ubuntu desktop is using NetPlan, but also Network Manager, so we can use nmcli here. So a lot of cool networking stuff. Like I say, we cover that in the webinars, so feel free to sign up for those. Check it out at my website at proust.tech. Yada, yada, yada. Shameless plug. Anyways, let's do a little testing. First of all, we'll do a ping. Another shameless plug. We'll ping proust.tech. Okay, and let's check the response on this. Now, a little bit of a delay here because I haven't connected to proust.tech yet. But now, once it's connecting, our average ping time is 16 milliseconds. Not bad. That's normal from any of my systems in my lab, so that looks good. Next thing we can do is a speed test. Speed test CLI is a great program. You can install that by doing a sudo apt install speed test -CLI. I already have, so I'll just run the command. And to avoid showing any personally identifiable connection information, we'll do that with the --simple option. Okay, and there's our responses. So the ping was actually slow, 70 milliseconds. Normally it's faster than that. But if we were to do 4 or 5 of these, I think you'd find a good average that would be closer to this number. But we see the download is 294 megabits, upload is 19.55 megabits, and that is essentially what I'm paying for with this business cable internet line. So it is working according to plan, looks good. And so next thing we want to do is connect to Wi-Fi. All right, so we could do that once again in our settings. Instead of network, we'd go to Wi-Fi. And here we can see a bunch of visible networks. Here's the one I want to connect to, unknown network 5. So we'll click on that, and that's going to require a password. Let's see if I remember what it is. And attempt to connect. Well, I got it right, I guess. We are connected. Good. Fantastic. So that will now work as our backup internet connection. So that was easy, right? If you wanted to do this in the command line and you had Network Manager running as your base networking service, you could do a couple things. You could do an NMCLI dev Wi-Fi, not wiki, but Wi-Fi. Here we go, and we see a list of all the Wi-Fi networks that we can connect to. What I connected to is unknown network 5, right? And we're seeing 405 megabit per second connection max on that. I also have unknown guest and unknown network 2.4. I just use names like that. And we have lots of other interesting stuff in the building here. Don't pay any attention to that, but that's how you could list it with that command. And then if you actually wanted to connect, you would do something like an NMCLI dev Wi-Fi, and in double quotes, we would do something like the name, that's the SSID that we would connect to, the wireless network name, and we would say password and then specify what the password is. And then we would say name, and then specify the name that we choose for the Wi-Fi network, whatever that is. And that's it. Then you would connect, and you would have to type the password in at that point. Unfortunately, you'd have to type it in clear text, I believe, unless they've modified that in the NMCLI command. But that's essentially how you would do it in the command line. I mentioned I wanted to also turn off the power save option for Wi-Fi because it can get in the way of the Wi-Fi connectivity, and that can be accessed in /etc/network manager/conf. conf.d. And inside of there, you'll see default Wi-Fi power saver on. That's a configuration file. And so I want to configure that. I'll need sudo powers to do so. I like using Vim as my editor, but you can use whatever editor you want. And we'll do that. And of course, Vim isn't found, so we got to install that. Got to have Vim. Or NeoVim, or one of the other awesome derivatives that's out there. Been using Vim for too long. And then we can just run that command again, and that'll open it up. So right now, power save is set to 3. I want to set that to 2, which will essentially turn it off, and we'll see if that aids in our connectivity. Save that file, and we're good to go. Sometimes I also modify the IPv4 to take precedence over IPv6. I might do that for the wired connection. If we do a cd/etc, and inside there, if we modify gai.conf, we can change that here in the precedence area. So that's something that I might do also, change it so that IP version 4 takes precedence over IP version 6, because I'll be using that more commonly. And I talk about that more in my article for the system that I built at home, which is a very similar system. And so the link is in the documentation and the description for this video. All right, so now if we run an IPA again, we'll see both of our devices, the wired connection at the static address. Notice that it no longer says dynamic here. It's a statically assigned IP. And then our wireless connection, which now is getting an IP address automatically from my Soho router, and that indeed is dynamic. Another way to look at this would be to do an IP-BR-CA, and that'll just give us the key information that we want for our connection, the state, and the IP address for it. So that's a nice command to use as well. We could also do an NMCLI and press enter, and you will see that not only is the wired connection green now, but also the wireless connection. That is green as well, and we see the IP address, and it's connected to unknown network 5. Very good. So that is our networking section, and it should work well. I might do a couple more tweaks here and there, you never know, but it's pretty much set up at this point. Now it's time for video. The NVIDIA driver was installed automatically by Ubuntu. In some cases, it's not, depending on what Linux distro you're working with. But they gave that option during the install process to grab third-party video or GPU and Wi-Fi drivers. So I opted to do that. It's a longer process if you don't do that, but also doable. But it is there already. I'm going to show how to access it and see what version of the NVIDIA driver we're running. We'll also install the NV Top program, which is pretty cool. And then I'm going to disable the built-in default Nouveau video driver that comes with Linux, because sometimes that can kind of get in the way if you're using the NVIDIA driver. So let's begin. Okay, so we're back at our new system, our Ubuntu system in the terminal here. So let's run a couple commands. And first one I'm going to run is cat. I'm going to do a cat on the version of the NVIDIA driver we're using. So that's going to be cat/proc/driver/NVIDIA/version. And we'll see the kernel module for that and the version that we're running here. So 580.65. Ubuntu's pretty good at updating to newer versions of the NVIDIA driver. Maybe not as fast as, say, Fedora or Arch, but pretty quick. So that is one way to view that information. Another way is to use the lspci command in Linux. We could do an lspci-k pipe grep, and then look for, do a -EA3, and then look for a couple different strings here. In double quotes, we'll do VGA, pipe, 3D, pipe, and display, if I can type it right, and close the double quotes for that. Run that command, and we will see the display controller. This is the Intel Corporation Raptor Lake S GT1. Okay, UHD Graphics 770. That's the built-in video card in the motherboard, which I do plan to use, and it is visible and working. I want to use that for a 5th monitor. I'm hoping that it'll actually function properly. We'll see. But then we have the main video card here, VGA compatible, NVIDIA Corporation, and this is a GeForce RTX 3060. Okay, nice. So that is going to be the main card. That has 4 ports, 3 display ports and 1 HDMI. Going to use all of those. And then probably the HDMI port from this one that's built into the motherboard. All right. Now, if you look at kernel modules, you'll see we do have NVIDIA AFB, we have NVIDIA DRM, and we have NVIDIA, but we also have Nouveau. So again, like I said, that can kind of conflict sometimes. That's one of the things I'll do. I'll check and possibly disable it. I'll show how to disable it at the end of this segment. All right, some other commands that we can run. Since we have the NVIDIA driver running, we can run NVIDIA-SMI, and that'll give a nice table of information here. It'll show the driver version, 580.65.06, the CUDA version, 13.0. We see the amount of memory. We've got 12 gig, and what we're actually using, which isn't really much right now because we're not really doing anything. It's hovering at 40, well, at the time that I typed the command, it's at 47 degrees Celsius. And so that's not bad. I can definitely go way hotter than that. And if we were to play games or do some really high-end rendering, you know, we might peak it out at 60 or 65 degrees Celsius probably. That's how it's been testing on the card at my home system. So NVIDIA-SMI gives some good information there. Again, I'm not using any type of AMD stuff. We're going all NVIDIA for this particular build, so that's how it is. Another command you can run is NVIDIA-settings, and that'll bring up a GUI window where you can see all the information and work with your X server display configuration. Now, this quite often I'll have to work with a little bit to kind of tweak everything, especially if you have different monitors. And again, I'm going to have 5 different monitors connected, so I'll probably go in here to do some additional tweaking. Sometimes we have to change some of the settings, like no reflection, or change the underscan, or go to advanced and make some changes within our X video settings, maybe change some of the information here. Force composition pipeline. These are the kind of things that sometimes we have to do, especially when we're working with OBS or video recording and rendering and so forth. But I'm not going to change any of these, going to quit out of there. Just wanted to show that program. And another program I like to use is called NVTop. Now, that's not installed by default on most Linux systems, so we can install that with the sudo apt install NVTop. Okay, and then we can run that. And it says this one is missing support for reporting Intel GPU memory, power, fan, and temperature. I'm not really too concerned about that. That's the built-in card in the motherboard, the integrated GPU. So that's fine. We'll just say okay for that. But it does indeed see the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060. That's what I'm concerned with, because that's what will possibly, you know, start to get hotter and whatnot. Now, this is actually saying 58 degrees right now. So that's interesting. Now, I don't have the case closed yet. But if it starts to get a little bit higher, you'll hear the fans turn on more and they'll work harder to cool it. I don't hear them right now. The case is right next to me and it's open. But we do see that information, and you can see the transfer speed here. You can see the GPU percentage usage, very low right now. So lots of information within here. This is NVTop, and definitely a cool program to use to kind of analyze and also troubleshoot your video card, your GPU. So I'm just going to quit out of here with an F10. Okay, so get out of there. So that's a little bit of NVTop, cool program if you want to check it out. Kind of like the Top program, which is built into Linux, which I use all the time. I have a custom config for Top that I use on my main workstation. I'll be copying that over. It's the Top RC configuration file. I'll be copying that to this system soon once we get this system up and running. But NVTop, kind of like the video version of that. All right, so finally I said I wanted to disable the Nouveau driver. So I definitely want to do that. I want to blacklist it, so to speak. So we have to do that within the modules, because it's considered a module within Linux. So I'm going to change over to /etc/modprobe.d. And then if we take a look inside there, and these colors aren't so great, really have to change these colors, change my terminal colors. I'll be doing that soon. I like Dracula. I'll probably install that soon and show that at the end, maybe once it's all configured. But you can see in here there is a lot of files. We have blacklist files, but I'm actually going to create a new one, and we'll call it blacklist-nouveau. So we're going to do a sudo vim, and we'll call the file blacklist-nouveau. Am I typing that correctly? I believe so. So blacklist-nouveau.conf. Good, that should work. Press enter, and we're going to add a couple lines here. First of all, we'll do a blacklist space nouveau and that is the command. Blacklist is the command. So we're blacklisting that module. And then I'll say options, nouveau, mode set equals 0. So that should disable it and blacklist it, and it shouldn't, once we reboot the computer, it should not show that nouveau module when we do that lspci command again. Just rechecking that, looks good, and we'll close and save. And there we go. Now we have that new file in there for blacklistnouveau.conf. And that's about it. That's about it for video. And we'll move on to the next step. Time to install OBS Studio to our system. This is what I will use to record the bulk of my videos. We'll also install the drivers and software for the Blackmagic DeckLink cards and make sure that OBS can see them so I can do my video capture directly into OBS. Now, I won't kid you, the first attempt at this did not work and the Blackmagic cards were not recognized. It's Linux, these things can happen. However, I solved the problem, went through the documentation, figured out the correct method for this particular system and Ubuntu, and the order for the installation, and it should now work. Note that I completely reinstalled Ubuntu twice to verify the procedure would work properly and that it is reproducible. I'm hoping that it will work now. Okay, let's get to it. Okay, so back in the Ubuntu system, and you can see I changed the terminal, different color scheme, easier on the eyes. I don't really like the default built-in terminal scheme in Ubuntu, but that's personal preference. I think this is easier to see, though. And let's go ahead and work with OBS. Now, first of all, before the installation, I like to do a sudo apt update and check for updates, and then whatever updates there are, do a sudo apt upgrade. Now, that worked previously in this scenario for installing OBS and the DeckLink cards, so that's what I did this past time as well. I've already done this, and I would also do a sudo apt auto remove to remove any junk that's there, and also a sudo apt clean to clean out the repositories. To do the OBS installation, we have a couple of options. You could install from Flatpak. However, that runs in an isolated sandbox, and it makes it difficult to work with the DeckLink cards. So I'm going to be installing from apt as the package manager. To do that, we first have to set up the repository. So I'm going to do a sudo add-apt-repository. And the path for that, the PPA, is going to be OBS project / OBS-studio. Okay, and so that's going to add that in. We'll press enter to continue to get that new repository. Next, we can go and install a program. So that'll be a sudo apt install OBS-studio. And we'll say yes to this for 420 megs. And we'll just fast forward through that installation. And the Ubuntu repositories are pretty slow right now as I'm trying to download this stuff. Could have something to do with the fact that they just dropped Ubuntu 24.04.04. We installed 0.03, the point release, and 0.04 just dropped. I just got a message for that. So that could slow things down because a lot of people are grabbing from the Ubuntu repositories right now. So I just fast forwarded through that, and now it should be installed, and we should be able to run it. So we'll just hit the super key and type OBS, and there it is, OBS Studio. We'll optimize this for recording right now and leave the current settings, say next, apply them, and OBS is here. And it's version 32, that's good. I wanted at least version 31.1, and so Ubuntu is dropping 32.0.0 now. And normally what you would do is you would add sources, but the source we need would be Blackmagic. That's not here yet, so we need to install those cards. Okay, moving on, let's go ahead and install the Blackmagic DeckLink video capture cards. And so I want to do a couple things first. First of all, you want to make sure that secure boot is enabled in the BIOS. That could cause problems if it's disabled. So I've checked that in the BIOS. That's in the security section if you go to advanced on this MSI board. And now I want to check the devices. So I'm going to do an LSPCI and check if they're recognized in Linux. And we'll do a pipe grep Blackmagic with a capital B. And it does see them, and it sees both. So this is the first one, this is the second one, looking good. 2 Blackmagic design devices. The next thing we want to do is run an APT update, and then we want to install Build Essential and also the newest Linux headers so that it'll work properly with those cards. This is important. And it's not a step that's shown in the documentation that you download. So a little extra step here that we're going to do. So first we'll do a sudo apt update, take a look. Previously I had 5 packages available, and that is what we still have. So that is good. And now we could do that install. So we're going to do a sudo apt install, and the first package is build-essential. And the second is the Linux headers. So Linux-headers $, and that's the variable, and we're going to use the uname-r command as the variable, so it'll find out what we need as far as our current kernel for the newer headers. So that looks good, and we'll run that now. Okay, and lots of stuff is going to get installed. We'll say yes to continue, 194 megs of space. And we'll fast forward through this. Awesome, that was actually pretty quick. And so that is done. The next thing we want to do is download the driver and the desktop video package from Blackmagic. So I've already gone to the blackmagicdesign.com website, and I went to capture and playback. That's the type of card that I'm installing. And down here in latest downloads, we see desktop video 15.1. That's what we want. We want the latest desktop video software. So this software is not only software that allows you to see and use the cards, but it installs the drivers as well. So we're going to grab this now. And of course we want it for Linux. So a little bit of Linux love here. And we'll have to register. And so I'm going to do that off the scenes. The important part is to type in your serial number here. And so I'm going to do that now. Okay, and they show you where to find the serial number. I've typed that in, and we'll go to register and download. Okay, here we go. It's downloading it now. So that's Blackmagic Desktop Video Linux. This is version 15.1, and we'll just fast forward through that. And our download speed isn't too bad, 32 megabytes per second on the average there. Multiply by 8, we're at about 250 megabits per second, and the internet connection is a 300 megabit per second connection, so not too bad. And that's it. So if you're working with these cards, you should download the manual, and I've gotten that as well from documents.blackmagicdesign.com, and it gives you a basic instructions as to how to do this. It also gives some commands you can work with for the firmware updater. However, like I said, it doesn't go over the build essentials and the Linux headers. So that's something that you have to do for a lot of different hardware that you might want to work with. And so that's not included here. And just got to make sure that you do that if you're going to install devices like this. So that is done. And now we could install this from the GUI, but I love doing it in the command line. So let's do that now. We'll change over to the downloads directory, and inside there we'll see that tar file. We just need to extract that. So we'll do a tar-xvf on Blackmagic and the entire tar file. Okay, so we'll extract that, and that should create a directory for us. Let's enter that. And inside there, you'll see a README. Now, the README file had some good information, for example, about secure boot and some other things. And also for your particular distro, you may need to do different things. So always read the readme.txt and also go to the documentation online as well. Now, we have RPMs for Fedora and Red Hat and so on, but I'm going to be using Deb because we are using Ubuntu here, so we'll change over to Deb. And inside there, we have different platforms. I'm working on an x86 platform, Intel, so we'll change over to that. And now we'll see 3 Deb packages, and I want all 3. So this is the desktop video, this is the GUI program for it, and also Media Express. I want all 3 of these. So I'm going to do a sudo apt, I'm going to type correctly, sudo apt install, and we'll just do a /star.deb. So all files named .deb within this directory. And let's do it now and cross our fingers and hope it works. So this is going to install the core drivers, the video software, and the Media Express. And it shows those 3 and 348 megabytes of additional space. We'll say yes, let's do it. Okay, now in order to do this, we have to enter a one-time password for enrollment of our secure boot key. This is an MOK, and when we're done with the install, we'll have to reboot the system and then continue through and apply that MOK, authorize it. So to start, we need to put in a password and input that again. And there we go. So preparing new Blackmagic driver, adding to DKMS, which was installed when we did the Linux, the Build Essential install. And you might have seen a little failure there, but this should still work. Now, it says an MOK enrollment request has been issued. Again, we're going to have to reboot and go through the prompts for that. And I'll show that the best I can. All right, so let's do a reboot now. And we'll give that a moment. There we go. And it says press any key to perform MOK management. So I'll press a key. Try to zoom in on this. And we have to enroll the MOK. So we'll do that now. Press enter. You can view the key if you want. I'm going to leave that private. And we'll go to continue. And we'll say yes. Then we need to type in the password, and I'll type that in now and press enter and reboot. And that should enroll the MOK, and that should allow us to utilize the hardware properly. All right, and we are rebooted now. Go back to our terminal, and let's do some checking here. First, once again, we'll do an lspci space pipe space grep. Don't really need the spaces, but grep on Blackmagic, capital B. We still see the devices. Linux sees them. They're good. We can run some other commands. And, oh, by the way, in some cases, you might need to do a full shutdown, especially if you did any firmware updates on your capture cards. So keep that in mind. A reboot might not be enough. You might need to do a full shutdown. When that kind of thing is the case, I'll do a full shutdown or a graceful shutdown, if you will, and then hit the kill switch, wait 10 seconds, and then boot everything back up. But let's see if everything worked here. Now, we can run some more commands. First, we could do a DKMS, since that was installed with Essential. DKMS status -m Blackmagic -IO -K, and then in single quotes, you name -R. Press enter, and it tells us that Blackmagic-IO has been added. Good, that's what we want. Next, we can do a D message and do a grep on Blackmagic and see if there's any issues there. Got to do that with sudo, unless you're working as root. And so check it out. Initialize serial driver for Mini Recorder on 05. And before that, initialize serial driver for the mini recorder on O3. So that actually looks good as well. We can also do a command because we have commands built in from the software now. So for example, Blackmagic firmware updater, each word is in caps and it's all one word, and we could do status. And this is what we want. Here's the first one. Okay, and it's okay. And the second one, labeled 1, is also okay. That's what we want here. We want to see okay for both. Fantastic. So next step, let's open the Blackmagic software to see if they're recognized. So I'll just hit the super key, BLA, there's Blackmagic. Oh yeah, good stuff. Now, like I said, this did not work for me the first time, and it was just blank, and it wasn't showing anything, and OBS wouldn't pick them up. And so a little bit of a head scratcher. I think I may have just installed things in the wrong order and did something weird with DKMS and the MOK when I installed Essential, the build Essential, I should say. So, you know, again, Linux doesn't normally fail me. In fact, it rarely ever fails me. It's me that fails Linux is what happens. So anyhow, it sees the first one, and if we click here, it sees the second one, same card, but you can see we have 2 dots here. We have HDMI and SDI for video input. Fantastic. So we could possibly use these if we wanted to here. I'm assuming they're going to work. But now I want to check it in OBS. So let's open OBS back up. Good. Okay, now we have no sources yet. So let's click the plus sign. And now we have Blackmagic device. Dun, 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 dun. Press enter for that. I'm going to call this Blackmagic device 1. Click OK. And then we have to click the drop down and we have to select. Now, generally how this type of thing will work, if they're the same type of card, the one that's physically higher and closer to the CPU will be higher on the list here. I've already connected an HDMI cable to that higher one, so let's check it. Now, we don't see anything yet. You have to choose the right video connection because these have HDMI and SDI. So we'll switch that to HDMI. And there it is. That's my overhead camera that I've been using, which, by the way, works much better with this card as opposed to the junky HDMI to USB adapter. So we'll click OK for that, and now we have the video. And you can see, here I am, hello, hello. And I'm telling you, the colors are better, the video in general is better. And we're just leaving it as auto right now. If we double click on this, the mode is auto, but you could change the resolution and everything else here if you needed to. Okay, so that is good. I'm not going to test the second one because I already did it before when I was going through the whole process, and they both worked. Both were functional. I'm just going to leave it as this one for now and just say, oh my goodness, it actually functions, because that was a bit of a workaround, and just to record this was just a lot of work basically. So that's good. Now, what I'm doing here with these capture cards should be much better than using USB converters. You can see how pixelated my video is. My main system it can't handle it anymore. It just can't handle it. And so that was one of the main reasons to move to a newer system. So the capture cards are going to help. Also, I was saying to capture the screen in OBS, instead of using instead of using screen capture, which is good, I'm going to be using a splitter off of the video card, and one end's going to go to a monitor, another end is going to go to one of the capture cards. And so that'll do away with screen capture in OBS altogether, which in itself uses a ton of resources on the system. You could also do this if you have pass-through on your monitor. You could connect the video card out to the monitor. Maybe you don't like how it might get a little grainy if you use an HDMI splitter. So you could go to the monitor and then out back to the video capture card if you have that pass through HDMI and have an output. So that's another option. And I would test that. I would check to see which is better, not only for viewing the monitor, but also for recording. And I will be testing that. But this way, we don't have to use screen capture at all. We're going to use a physical Blackmagic device. So that's really good too. And that should also help with like glitchiness, because whenever you work with screen capture, whether it's the old version, I forget what it's called, XSM or whatever it is, or the newer version with Pipewire, they could be glitchy, especially if you have different video configurations. You can get little glitchy artifacts and stuff like that. So this way we're kind of bypassing all of that and going to be capturing directly with a physical device. So I've been hoping and wishing to do this for a long time now, basically. Now, that said, Pipewire is awesome. I've done a lot of testing at home with a similar system with OBS and Pipewire, and I've recorded at 60 frames per second at 1440p, and it has worked really well. But you can see it draining the system. So this, I believe, will be a lot better for the resources on this main system. Okay, awesome. So there we have it. We've got our video, and you're actually looking at the top of the computer. You can see some of the LED lights. So good stuff. Awesome. And if anybody has any questions on OBS and getting these types of cards to work, feel free to contact me at my Discord server or whatever. That's what I do. I help people figure this stuff out, get them on the right path if necessary. But that was definitely a bit of work, but OBS is now done. The deck links are up and running, and I'm excited. On to the next step. Now we're ready to do the replacement. Going to reorganize my whole workstation area and take out the old system, put the new one in, and then we'll start recording the rest of this video on OBS on the new system. Let's get going. Okay, so briefly, just a little bit of the tools I use and also what I hold on to after the build. So we've got our Phillips head screwdriver, got to have the Phillips head. Also have a smaller Phillips head for smaller Phillips head screws. It also has a flathead on the other end, so a multi-tool, and a pair of cutters, box cutter, a parts grabber, and a tube, or more than one, for screws and loose parts, thermal compound, or paste, and I actually used Arctic Silver. Always have a notepad and a pencil around so you can write down notes. And I use a pointer. I like to use chopsticks for this, and so they're made of wood or some simulacrum of wood. And this way it won't damage anything. Don't want to use anything metal. And then, of course, anti-static protection. So we have an anti-static strap here, and anti-static mat, and other things. And so these are the main tools, not really that much. Now, I have a ton of tools, but that's really all you need for building the system. When I'm done, I'll usually keep a couple of the boxes. First of all, the motherboard box. All of the instructions will go in there. And, oh, stickers. I love stickers. Got an extra SATA cable that came with that. That'll probably go in my SATA box, but otherwise it would stay in here. This actually comes with an extra M2 locker, M2 slot locker. So if you break one or lose one, it has that. So quite often I'll keep that in the box or keep that with my tools. All the instructions, and then smaller boxes as well, like for the memory and the drive, and then any additional stuff like tie wraps. I might keep those separate, it depends, and any screws that we might use for that. I also hold on to the power supply box because good power supplies will have anywhere from 5 to 10 year warranties where you can send them back. So hold on to that, and also the video card box. And we've got our CPU box and additional instructions. So I'll keep all that in, a lot of this stuff in the motherboard box, so I know, and I'll label this with the P-Touch with the name of the computer and what computer it is, so I know which one that we're working with here. But that's just a little bit about the tools and kind of a little cleanup afterwards as well. All right, and there it is. The rebuild is done. Here's the replacement computer, and we got some UPSs down below, a little dark. Put in a PDU on top for the wall warts, and it's all nicey nice, lit up and working well. It's actually been a couple weeks since I did the last part of this video because I've been building this whole system. Here it is, whole workstation all set up now, and been getting it all up and running. And so the replacement is now good. We are using the new system, and we are recording in OBS on this new system, utilizing the Blackmagic video cards, the capture cards. So the replacement is good, and we have our networking up and running here. And so I did actually install a 2.5 gigabit switch and connected my main system to it and my older system. And I'll be connecting other systems to it as we go. Just want to make sure the switch works well for a couple days before we go any further. But you can see here it says connected and 2500 megabits per second or 2.5 gigabit. That is on. We also have our Wi-Fi connection. And so networking is good. And everything's looking pretty awesome. What I was just doing just now, showing the computer, was done with my phone, and it is running Droid Cam. And you just have to set that up in OBS and then set it up on the phone, and it'll communicate wirelessly to OBS, and you can record everything that you're doing on the phone directly into OBS. So it's pretty cool. And you set that up as a droid cam, as a separate scene, basically, in OBS. So that works out pretty well. The capture cards are working awesome. So we definitely have a better setup here, and I'm excited about it. So let's move on to the next step. All right, so last stage here, coming towards the end of the video. Let's talk about the audio that I'm using and some of the apps and tweaks that I've done. And so we'll go through those now. And first of all, the audio, you can see here, this is a Rodecaster, and it's a Rodecaster 2. And so just picked this up to work with everything. I had an older Rodecaster, but it was having some problems and making some noise. And so I picked up a new one. Works very well. And you can see I'm actually right here. That's my microphone that we're using here. So I can connect all the mics and wireless mics to this and do Bluetooth connections, and it outputs directly into the computer just basically as a stereo feed. And we can see that within our settings. So we'll jump over to that now. And if we go to sound, we can see the Rodecaster Pro 2. And so this is acting as the output and the input device right now. And so that's good, but we can change that. I also have a line out from the built-in audio in the computer on the motherboard. So I'll use that with some speakers, and then we have various outputs for other things, digital outputs, and also for monitors, which I don't really use. And for inputs, that's basically the one that I'm going to use. I'm not going to use the webcam or anything else. I'm going to always be using the Rodecaster Pro 2. So this is a great device, but it only works as a stereo device right now in Linux. If you wanted to use it for multi-track, you might have some issues as of today, as of the recording of this video. Who knows, maybe in the future Linux will get more support for it. Linux has been getting all kinds of driver support, things like drivers for Focusrite devices and Behringer and other devices. So who knows, maybe more Rode devices down the road, so to speak. Anyways, this is not the only tool I'll use, but I will go in here to, modify what my input and output devices are. However, I will use other tools as well. Sometimes I'll use a tool called Pavu Control. And this is a good tool right here, Pavu Control. That's what I call it, at least. And from here, you can work with all your volume controls for your playback, whatever you're playing back on, whatever you're recording from application-wise, what your output devices are. So right now, here's my Rodecaster. That's what I'm using as my main output. but sometimes I'll use the built-in audio, the line out, and we can modify the volumes for these here if we want to, and also the input devices. Now, right now, this is actually lowered down to 93%. There's something a little weird going on with it where it'll get modified automatically by certain applications. So I have to troubleshoot that a little bit. I'm bringing that up to 0 dB. So I'm actually going to be a slightly louder now. And so we're at 100%. And then you have the configuration for each of your audio devices. So the Rodecaster Pro 2, that's going to be an analog stereo duplex, meaning incoming and outgoing signal. And then the built-in audio, I'm just using that as an output right now. So PAVU control, pretty nice. Another tool that I'll use quite often is the ALSA mixer, because ALSA is basically your baseline audio within Linux. And if we press enter, you can take a look at the different devices that you have here, and you can work with those with this tool as well. This is more of a text-based looking tool, but it doesn't do anything with the Rodecaster. So ALSA doesn't really work with the Rodecaster well. For more information on audio devices and working with ALSA, check out my article on the other computer build that I did, where I have a home system with an audio system and a large mixer board, which ALSA does see, and it works great with Linux as well. But this is another tool that we might use. And if I want to make any changes to, say, the built-in audio, I can do that here. I can change the master volume right here, and everything else, surround sound, 7-channel, line out, blah, blah, blah. And just press escape to get out of that. So those are some of the audio tools that I'll use. And you can see here I'm working in the terminal right now. In the terminal, I like to use the GNOME shell. And so that's what this is. And so it's the GNOME terminal. And I like to use this. I also like to use Tilix. And so I have Tilix installed, but I haven't configured it yet. I want to get my config from my old system because it has all the different windows and splits and multiplexes and so forth. But the GNOME terminal that's built into GNOME works great. So I like to use that. And I'm using the Fish shell. So that's the actual shell I'm using. And then I'm using the Starship prompt. So if we take a look here and change over to something like this, where I'm doing some of my programming, change over to this, you can see we'll get some different prompt icons and things like that. When we're working with the Starship prompt, and some of them won't show up unless you have the right font. I have to choose which nerd font I want to use. So still a lot of work to do with the terminal and also with Tilix. And quite often I like to use the Dracula theme. That's what we have here. That's the color scheme that we're using. And I did that within the Fish shell. Now, quite often what I like to do is I'll do a systemctl status on my system just to check how it's running. So systemctl status, and I want to make sure that it is running and that it's green and that there's no errors. If you see red degraded, then you know you have a problem, and that means you have a failed unit and you want to find out why it has failed, because that could cause performance issues and so on. Speaking of performance, a couple other things that I'll do here is I'll go to power in the settings and make sure that the power mode is set to performance, because it's a pretty powerful computer. I want to make sure I'm getting the best usage out of it. That's going to use more wattage. It's going to use more electricity, but that's what I want. I want it to run in performance mode. It's a real system, right? And there's some more tweaks that we can do. And I showed this on the article for the build that I did, the super long article on my website. And so this is one of the guys that I'll run. I'll do a preempt full NOHZ full all thread IRQs, and more tweaks at this link, which I'll post in the video as well in the description. And so this can help if you need more performance for your kernel in Ubuntu 24.04. For video and audio and that type of thing. I haven't actually done this on this particular system yet, but I did it in my home system, and it seems to help out a little bit. But other than that, just the performance item here in power in the settings. and that's about it. So some of the other things I'll do on this system is I will turn off updates. So we have a software update here. We have security updates that are coming up. Quite often, if I'm working on a project, I'll turn off updates until I'm ready to go forward and finish the project. Then I'll update the system just so there's no problems with the applications. But security updates, I do usually want to install, so I'll normally say yes to that. That can be found in software and updates, and then we go to the updates section here. So right now I'm only subscribed to security updates. I'll install those, but I don't want all updates until I finish a project, right? This way there's no conflicts with different applications getting changes or drivers on the systems or kernel issues or who knows what. So I'll usually turn those off and do security updates until I'm done with a project. That's done in software and updates in GNOME. All right, so some other stuff here. I heavily use VS Codium or VS Code if I have to, but VS Codium on this system. And I work with that a lot, so that is installed for all the coding. My file manager that I like to use is Dolphin. That's actually part of KDE, but I like using that in GNOME, so I installed that as well. That requires a couple tweaks if you like to do that. And we have LibreOffice as well. For music player, I have Strawberry and Rhythmbox, and also, work with Spotify and other tools. Communications platform is Discord, and we actually have KVM installed as well, which we did during some live streams. So it's actually working as a KVM virtualization system as well. And we have the virtual machine manager up and running, and I have some virtual machines already set up. I use Obsidian and Joplin for note-taking. I use No Machine, which I think I showed already, for connecting to remote systems. FileZilla for SFTP transfers. And also Chromium and Chrome when I need them, but generally Firefox or something Firefox related. So lots of tools and utilities that I run on this system. Cool stuff. So the system's really shaping up. Let's wrap up this video. Okay, so that's it. Let's wrap up this insanely long adventure. Like I say, I've been recording this over like the course of a month between, setting up the system and building it and, spending a couple weeks tweaking it and everything, getting it configured. So insanely long adventure, but it was awesome. And it's great to have a new workstation that's going to do what I want it to do. I'm super happy with this new system. I feel very fortunate to have been able to build it, and I like to share this experience with people. So everything appears to be working as planned, and we did it within budget. So that's cool. I hope that this extraordinarily long video was helpful to you. Feel free to comment below. Just don't roast me too bad. My ego is very fragile. You can also contact me at my Discord server or at prouse.tech. So that's it. Until next time, I'm Dave, and I'm out of here. Thanks for watching.